Hello, horror lovers. Welcome to our channel. If you enjoy that spine-chilling sensation before going to sleep, you're in the right place. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. This is really important to me. Like the video, and don't forget to comment which city you're watching from. Leave your comment now because you'll probably fall asleep after this story. Your support helps us keep bringing the best horror stories. Now, turn off the lights, lie down, and get ready for a night of nightmares. I'll develop topic 1 into a longer, more detailed narrative with dialogue, maintaining the first-person perspective and horror elements. The first night I heard them, I thought I was going mad. It started as a faint whisper, barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing the last of the dinner dishes, when a sound like a distant sigh made me pause. "Hello?" I called out, glancing over my shoulder. The kitchen was empty, shadows stretching across the worn linoleum floor in the dim evening light. My son, Tommy, was already tucked into bed upstairs. I shook my head, attributing the sound to the creaks and groans of our new old house settling. As I turned back to the sink, I heard it again. This time, it was clearer, unmistakably a voice. "Help us," it whispered, seeming to emanate from the drain. I dropped the plate I was holding, my heart racing as it clattered loudly in the sink. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my attempt to sound brave. Silence answered me, broken only by the steady drip of the faucet. I laughed nervously, running a trembling hand through my hair. "Get it together, Sarah," I muttered to myself. "It's just your imagination playing tricks on you." But as I reached to turn off the tap, another voice joined the first. This one deeper, more desperate. "Please release us," it pleaded. I stumbled backward, my hip hitting the kitchen island hard enough to bruise. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a prank. Or maybe I was more exhausted than I realized. Single motherhood and a recent move could do that to a person, right? "Mom?" Tommy's sleepy voice called from upstairs. "Is everything okay?" I swallowed hard, forcing a calm I didn't feel into my voice. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." But I heard a loud noise, he protested. "It was just a plate slipping in the sink," I assured him, my eyes never leaving the drain. "I've got it under control. Sweet dreams, honey." I heard his bedroom door close and let out a shaky breath. The voices had fallen silent, but the air felt thick, oppressive, as if something unseen was pressing down on me from all sides. Cautiously, I approached the sink again. The drain gaped like a black maw, waiting to swallow me whole. I leaned in closer, straining to hear any sound. "Hello?" I whispered, feeling ridiculous. Is someone there?" For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, so faintly I almost missed it, a chorus of voices responded. "Help us," they begged in unison. "We're trapped. Please release us." I clapped a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. This couldn't be real. I was hallucinating, or dreaming, or... The voices grew louder, more insistent, a cacophony of pleas and cries echoing up from the depths of the drain. "Stop it," I hissed, slamming my palm down on the countertop. "You're not real. This isn't happening." But the voices persisted, growing in volume and desperation. "We are real," they insisted. "We are trapped between worlds. You must help us. Please, we've been here so long." I fumbled for the faucet, turning it on full blast. Water thundered into the sink, but instead of drowning out the voices, it seemed to amplify them. Their cries mixed with the rush of water, creating a nightmarish symphony that filled the kitchen. "Leave me alone," I shouted, clamping my hands over my ears. "I can't help you. I don't know how." Suddenly, the water turned ice cold, misting up from the sink in an unnatural fog. Within the mist, I could almost see faces forming, twisted in agony and despair. A cold, clammy hand seemed to brush against my cheek, and I jerked away with a strangled cry. "Mom?" Tommy's voice came again, closer this time. I heard his footsteps on the stairs. "What's going on?" Panic surged through me. I couldn't let him see this, couldn't let him hear the voices. Whatever was happening, I had to protect him from it. "Nothing, baby," I called out, my voice cracking. "Go back to bed. Mommy just stubbed her toe. I'm fine." I quickly shut off the water, but the voices lingered, softer now but still audible. "We'll be waiting," they whispered. "You can't ignore us forever. We need you, Sarah." How did they know my name? I backed away from the sink, my whole body trembling. This was impossible. Things like this didn't happen in real life. I told myself it was just the pipes settling in this old house, just my imagination running wild in a new, unfamiliar place. But as I turned off the kitchen light and hurried upstairs to check on Tommy, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The house felt different, alive in a way it hadn't before. And in the back of my mind, I could still hear them whispering, pleading, waiting. I climbed into bed that night, pulling the covers up to my chin like a child afraid of the dark. Sleep eluded me as I stared at the ceiling, straining to hear any sound from downstairs. The voices were silent now, but I knew with a bone-deep certainty that chilled me to my core that this was only the beginning. Whatever had awakened in this house, whatever had reached out to me from the drains, it wasn't going away, and sooner or later, I would have to face it. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the room. I stood at the sink, my hands submerged in soapy water, but my eyes were fixed on the drain. The events of last night felt like a distant nightmare, yet the memory of those pleading voices lingered, sending shivers down my spine. "Mom?" Tommy's voice startled me from my reverie. "Why do you keep staring at the sink?" I turned to face my son, forcing a smile onto my face. He stood in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder, his brow furrowed with concern. I hadn't realized how long I'd been standing there, lost in thought. "Oh, it's nothing, sweetie," I lied, drying my hands on a dish towel. "Just thinking about what to make for dinner tonight." Tommy didn't look convinced. He approached the sink, peering into it curiously. "Is it clogged or something? I can try to fix it if you want." My heart raced as he leaned closer to the drain. "No," I exclaimed, perhaps too forcefully. Tommy jumped back, startled by my outburst. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "I mean, no, it's fine. Just stay away from the sink for now, okay?" "Why?" Tommy asked, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What's wrong with it?" I scrambled for an explanation. I think I saw a mouse run down there last night. I don't want you getting bitten if it decides to come back up." Tommy's eyes widened. "A mouse? Cool. Can I see it if it comes back?" "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "Now come on, you'll be late for school." As I ushered him out the door, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. The voices had been silent since last night, but their absence was almost more unsettling than their presence. It felt like the calm before a storm. Throughout the day, I found myself drawn back to the sink time and time again. I'd catch myself staring at it, half expecting to hear those ethereal whispers rising from its depths. The rational part of my mind insisted it had all been a hallucination, a product of stress and an overactive imagination, but deep down I knew better. That evening, as I prepared dinner, Tommy wandered into the kitchen. He watched me for a moment before speaking. "Mom, are you okay? You seem different." I paused in my chopping, setting down the knife. "What do you mean, honey?" He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "I don't know. You keep looking at the sink like you're scared of it or something. And last night, I heard you yelling. Was it because of the mouse?" I sighed, realizing I couldn't keep brushing off his concerns. Kneeling down to his level, I took his hands in mine. "Tommy, sometimes grown-ups have trouble sleeping in new places. This house is still unfamiliar to us, and my mind is playing tricks on me. That's all." "Is that why you were talking to yourself last night?" he asked innocently. My blood ran cold. "What do you mean? When did you hear me talking to myself?" Tommy fidgeted, avoiding my gaze. I got up to get a glass of water and I heard you in the kitchen. You were saying something about helping and being trapped. I thought you were having a bad dream or something. I swallowed hard, trying to keep the fear from showing on my face. That's right, sweetheart. It was just a bad dream. Nothing to worry about. But as I stood up and turned back to the counter, I caught sight of something that made my heart stop. There, in the reflection of the kitchen window, I saw a pale, gaunt face peering up from the sink drain, its hollow eyes locked with mine, its mouth opening in a silent scream. I whirled around, but the sink was empty. Normal. Just a typical kitchen fixture, nothing more. Mom? Tommy's voice was small, frightened. You look like you saw a ghost. If only he knew how close to the truth he was. I forced a laugh, the sound brittle and unconvincing even to my own ears. No ghosts here, honey. Just your silly mom jumping at shadows. Why don't you go wash up for dinner and use the bathroom sink, okay? As Tommy left the room, I leaned heavily against the counter, my legs weak. The face in the reflection had been so real, so vivid. I could still see those pleading eyes, feel the weight of their silent cry for help. What was happening to me? Was I losing my mind? Or was there something truly sinister lurking in the depths of our new home? The thought of those trapped souls, if that's what they were, filled me with a mixture of pity and terror. They wanted something from me. That much was clear. But what could I possibly do to help them? As I finished preparing dinner, my mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. I knew I couldn't ignore this, couldn't pretend it wasn't happening. Sooner or later, I would have to confront whatever forces were at work here. But for now, I had to focus on Tommy. I had to be strong for him, to shield him from the horrors that seemed to be closing in around us. As I called him to dinner, I silently vowed to protect him, no matter what dark secrets this house held. Yet even as we sat down to eat, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. And somewhere, in the quiet gurgle of the pipes and the soft whisper of the wind, I could almost hear those voices again, waiting, pleading, demanding to be heard. The voices grew louder, more insistent. They spoke of pain, of being trapped. I tried to ignore them, but their cries haunted my dreams. It had been a week since I first heard them, and each night they grew stronger. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my body tense with exhaustion and fear. The digital clock on my nightstand blinked 3:17 a.m., its red glow casting eerie shadows across the room. Please, a voice whispered, seeming to come from the walls themselves. We can't bear it any longer. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my palms against my ears. Leave me alone, I mumbled. You're not real. But the voices persisted, a chorus of anguish that sent chills down my spine. We are real, they insisted. We suffer. We need your help. I sat up, flicking on the bedside lamp. The sudden light made me wince, but it was better than the oppressive darkness. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Release, they replied in unison. We are trapped between worlds. You must set us free. A sudden knock at my bedroom door made me jump. Mom? Tommy's voice called out. Are you okay? I heard you talking. Panic surged through me. I couldn't let Tommy know about the voices. I couldn't drag him into this nightmare. I'm fine, honey, I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. Just talking in my sleep. Go back to bed. Are you sure? He sounded worried. You've been acting weird lately. I swallowed hard, guilt mixing with fear in my chest. I'm sure, sweetheart. Everything's fine. I'll see you in the morning. I heard his footsteps retreating down the hall, and I let out a shaky breath. The voices had fallen silent during the exchange, but I knew they weren't gone. They were never truly gone anymore. As if on cue, they started up again, more urgent than before. You must act soon, they pleaded. Time is running out. Time for what? I demanded, frustration overriding my fear. What do you mean? But the voices offered no clear answer, only more cries of pain and pleas for help. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes, feeling the beginnings of a migraine throbbing behind my temples. Sleep was impossible now. I threw off the covers and padded downstairs to the kitchen, wincing as the cold tile floor met my bare feet. The house felt different at night, alive in a way it wasn't during the day. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of my vision, and every creak of the floorboards made my heart race. I filled a glass with water from the tap, purposely avoiding looking at the drain. But as I raised the glass to my lips, I caught a glimpse of something in its reflective surface. A face, gaunt and hollow-eyed, staring back at me from where my own reflection should have been. I dropped the glass, barely registering the sound of it shattering on the floor. Water splashed across my feet, but I hardly noticed. My eyes were fixed on the sink drain, where I could have sworn I saw movement. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Why are you doing this to me?" The drain gurgled, and suddenly the voices were all around me, no longer confined to whispers. They filled the kitchen, a cacophony of agony and desperation. "We are lost," they cried, "trapped by dark magic, bound to this place. Only you can free us." "But how?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "I don't know anything about magic or whatever this is." "The book," they replied. "Find the book. It will show you the way." "What book?" I demanded. "Where is it?" But the voices were already fading, leaving me alone in the dark kitchen surrounded by broken glass and spilled water. "Mom?" Tommy's voice came from the doorway, startling me. "What happened? Are you okay?" I turned to see him standing there, eyes wide with fear. How much had he heard? How much had he seen? "It's nothing, baby," I said, trying to smile. "I just dropped a glass. Go back to bed, okay? I'll clean this up." But Tommy didn't move. He stared at me, then at the sink, then back at me. "Who were you talking to?" he asked quietly. My heart sank. There was no way to explain this away, no lie that would satisfy him. I opened my mouth, not sure what I was going to say, when suddenly the pipes groaned loudly. Tommy jumped, his eyes growing even wider. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded slowly, realizing that there was no going back now. Whatever was happening, whatever dark forces were at work in our home, I couldn't shield Tommy from them anymore. We were in this together. "Honey," I said, kneeling down to his level, careful to avoid the broken glass. "There's something I need to tell you about this house, about the voices I've been hearing." As I began to explain, I saw a mix of fear and fascination in Tommy's eyes. Part of me wanted to stop, to tell him it was all a joke or a dream. But I knew that wasn't an option anymore. The voices had made it clear. Time was running out. And if I was going to find this mysterious book and put an end to this nightmare, I would need all the help I could get. Even if that meant involving my son in a horror I still barely understood myself, I began researching the history of our new home. Each revelation sent chills down my spine, hinting at dark rituals and forgotten sacrifices. The local library was a haven of musty books and flickering fluorescent lights. I sat at a worn wooden table, surrounded by stacks of old newspapers and city records. My eyes burned from hours of reading, but I couldn't stop. Not when I was finally starting to uncover the truth. "Miss Sarah?" The librarian's soft voice startled me. "We're closing in 15 minutes. Is there anything else I can help you with?" I looked up, blinking rapidly to refocus my vision. "Oh, thank you, Mrs. Landry. Actually, do you know if there are any books on local folklore? Specifically about voodoo?" Mrs. Landry's friendly smile faltered for a moment. "Voodoo? That's an unusual request. May I ask why you're interested in such a topic?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "It's for a project I'm working on, related to the history of my house on Cypress Street." At the mention of my address, Mrs. Landry's face paled. She glanced around nervously before leaning in close. "That old Devereaux place?" she whispered. "Oh, honey, you be careful with that house. There are stories." What kind of stories? I pressed, my heart racing. Mrs. Landry straightened up, shaking her head. Never you mind. Just old superstitions, that's all. Now, about those books. She hurried off, leaving me with more questions than answers. When she returned, she carried a small leather-bound volume that looked ancient. This isn't in our official catalog, she said, placing it on the table. But given your situation, I think you need to see it. Just promise me you'll be careful, dear. Some knowledge comes at a price. I nodded, my hands shaking as I opened the book. Its pages were filled with handwritten accounts of rituals, sacrifices, and dark magic. As I skimmed through it, one name kept appearing. Devereaux. My phone buzzed, jolting me from my research. A text from my neighbor asking if Tommy could stay for dinner. I quickly replied, grateful for the extra time to dig deeper into this mystery. Hours later, I finally made my way home, my mind reeling from what I'd discovered. The Devereaux family, it seemed, had a long and bloody history with voodoo. And my house had been at the center of it all. As I walked up the driveway, a chill ran down my spine. The house loomed before me, its windows like dark, watching eyes. For a moment, I could almost see the shadows of its past overlaying the present. Figures in robes chanting in candlelight. The flash of a ritual blade. I shook my head, trying to clear the image. Get a grip, Sarah, I muttered to myself. You're letting your imagination run wild. But as I reached for the door handle, a voice whispered from the shadows. You're beginning to understand, aren't you? I whirled around, my heart pounding. Who's there? An old woman stepped out from behind a large oak tree in the yard. Her eyes were milky with cataracts, but they seemed to pierce right through me. You're the new owner, she said. It wasn't a question. The house has been waiting for you. What do you mean? I asked, my voice trembling. Who are you? Names have power, she replied cryptically, but you can call me Marie. I knew the Devereaux family long ago. I've been watching this house, waiting for someone like you to come along. I took a step back, my hand fumbling for the doorknob behind me. Someone like me? Marie nodded solemnly. Someone who can hear them, the trapped souls. They've been crying out for so long, but few have the gift to listen. My blood ran cold. You know about the voices? Please, you have to tell me what's going on. What happened in this house? Marie's expression darkened. Dark magic, child. The Devereaux family thought they could control forces beyond their understanding. They opened a door that should have remained closed, and now the souls of their victims are trapped, neither here nor there. I felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the implications of her words. But why me? Why can I hear them? Because you're sensitive to the other side, Marie explained, and because the house has chosen you. It needs you to set things right. How? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. I don't know anything about voodoo or magic. How am I supposed to help? Marie reached into her shawl and pulled out a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. Start with this, she said, holding it out to me. It's a gris-gris bag, for protection. You're going to need it. I hesitated before taking it, the weight of it heavy in my hand. Thank you, but I still don't understand. What am I supposed to do? Listen to the voices, Marie said, already backing away into the shadows. They'll guide you. But be careful, child. The path you're on is dangerous. Not everyone trapped in that house wants to be freed. Before I could ask any more questions, she was gone, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and the ominous presence of the house behind me. I clutched the gris-gris bag tightly as I finally entered the house. The air inside felt thick, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. From somewhere deep within the walls, I heard the faint whisper of voices, growing stronger by the second. I'm here, I said softly, not sure if I was speaking to the house, the trapped souls, or myself. I'm listening. As if in response, a cold breeze swept through the hallway, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of decay and the echoes of long-forgotten rituals. I realized then that my research had only scratched the surface. The true history of this house, and my role in its dark legacy, was only beginning to unfold. The local library held secrets in its dusty archives. As I pieced together the puzzle, I felt eyes watching me from shadowy corners. I had been spending every spare moment at the library for the past week, diving deeper into the twisted history of my house and the Devereaux family. The more I uncovered, the more horrified I became. Yet I couldn't stop. The voices in my home had grown more insistent, more desperate, and I knew I was their only hope. Today, I sat at my usual table in the far corner of the library's archives section, surrounded by stacks of yellowed newspapers and crumbling ledgers. The air was thick with the musty scent of old paper and secrets long buried. "Back again, Miss Sarah?" Mrs. Landry's voice made me jump. The elderly librarian smiled apologetically as she set down a cup of tea beside me. "I thought you could use this. You've been at it for hours." I rubbed my tired eyes, grateful for the caffeine. "Thank you, Mrs. Landry. I don't know what I'd do without you." She hesitated, her kind eyes clouding with concern. "Dear, I can't help but worry. This obsession with the Devereaux house, it's not healthy. Perhaps it's time to let sleeping dogs lie." I shook my head, my voice low. "I can't, Mrs. Landry, not now. There's too much at stake." "What do you mean?" she asked, lowering herself into the chair opposite me. I bit my lip, wondering how much to reveal. Mrs. Landry had been invaluable in my research, pointing me towards obscure texts and forgotten records. But would she believe the full truth? "The house," I began hesitantly. "It's not right. There are things happening that I can't explain. I need to understand its history to figure out what's going on." Mrs. Landry's face paled. She glanced around furtively before leaning in close. "You've heard them, haven't you? The voices?" My heart skipped a beat. "You know about the voices?" She nodded gravely. "My grandmother used to tell stories about that house. Said it was built on unhallowed ground, that the Devereaux family dabbled in things best left alone. I always thought they were just tales to scare children, but—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Please," I begged. "I need to know everything. What else did your grandmother say?" Mrs. Landry sighed heavily. She spoke of rituals, of sacrifices made in the name of power. The Devereaux family was obsessed with the idea of immortality, you see. They believed they could cheat death itself through voodoo. A chill ran down my spine. Did they succeed? "In a way," she replied cryptically, "but not as they intended. The stories say they opened a doorway between worlds, trapping souls in a kind of limbo. Neither alive nor dead, neither here nor there. The voices I'd been hearing, could they be these trapped souls? The thought made me sick to my stomach. "Is there a way to free them?" I asked. Mrs. Landry's expression turned grave. "My grandmother mentioned a book, a grimoire of sorts containing the rituals the Devereaux family used. But Sarah, dear, you mustn't go looking for it. Such knowledge is dangerous." "I have to," I insisted. "I can't just ignore what's happening. These souls, they're suffering. They need help." The librarian studied me for a long moment before nodding resignedly. "I see there's no dissuading you. Very well, I may know where to start looking for information about this grimoire. Wait here." As Mrs. Landry shuffled off into the stacks, I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. Slowly I turned in my chair, scanning the shadowy corners of the archive room. For a split second I could have sworn I saw a figure standing among the shelves watching me. But when I blinked, it was gone. "Just your imagination," I muttered to myself. But the uneasy feeling persisted. Mrs. Landry returned a few minutes later, carrying a thin leather-bound journal. "This belonged to Eliza Devereaux," she explained, setting it down carefully. "It's not the grimoire itself, but it might point you in the right direction. Be careful, Sarah. Some doors once opened can never be fully closed. With trembling hands, I opened the journal. Eliza's spidery handwriting filled the pages, detailing her family's descent into darkness. As I read, the library around me seemed to fade away, and I found myself transported to New Orleans of the late 1800s. Eliza Devereaux's journal, May 15, 1897. Father's obsession grows stronger by the day. He speaks of nothing but the ritual, of the power it will bring us. Mother tries to dissuade him, but her pleas fall on deaf ears. I fear what this madness will bring upon our family. Last night I overheard them arguing in Father's study. Mother begged him to destroy the grimoire, saying it was evil, that it would be our downfall. Father flew into a rage unlike anything I've ever seen. He struck her, shouting that she was a fool, that she couldn't see the greatness that awaited us. I wanted to run to her aid, but fear kept me rooted to the spot. What has become of my family? What dark forces have taken hold of my father's mind? The journal entries continued, each more disturbing than the last. Eliza wrote of strange visitors arriving at all hours of the night, of chanting echoing from the basement, of animals going missing from neighboring farms. Then, I came across an entry that made my blood run cold. June 21st, 1897. It's done. God forgive us, it's done. The ritual. I can scarcely bring myself to describe the horrors I witnessed, the screams, the blood, the unearthly light that filled the basement. Father says we've succeeded, that we've opened the door to immortality. But at what cost? Something came through that door, something that should not be. I see shadows moving where there should be none, hear whispers in empty rooms. And the voices, oh, the voices. They cry out in agony, begging for release. What have we done? What have we unleashed upon this world? I closed the journal, my hands shaking. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the picture they formed was more terrifying than I could have imagined. Sarah? Mrs. Landry's concerned voice broke through my reverie. Are you all right? You've gone quite pale. I shook my head, trying to clear the horrific images Eliza's words had conjured. I'm not sure. This journal, it's disturbing, isn't it? She finished for me. I've never had the courage to read it myself. What does it say? I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. The Devereaux family, they performed some kind of ritual. They were trying to achieve immortality, but something went wrong. They opened a doorway of some kind, trapping souls in our world. Mrs. Landry nodded solemnly, just as the story said. But Sarah, what does this mean for you? For your house? I think, I said slowly, the realization dawning on me. I think I'm living in that doorway. The voices I'm hearing, they're the trapped souls. They need my help to cross over, to find peace. But how? Mrs. Landry asked, her brow furrowed with worry. Surely you're not thinking of performing the ritual yourself? I shook my head. No, not exactly. But there must be a way to reverse it, to close the doorway and free the souls. The grimoire Eliza mentioned. If I could find it. Sarah, no, Mrs. Landry interrupted, her voice sharp. That book is dangerous, it's evil. Searching for it will only bring you more trouble. I don't have a choice, I insisted. I can't just ignore what's happening. These souls are suffering, and for some reason they've chosen me to help them. I have to try. Mrs. Landry sighed heavily, resignation in her eyes. I can see there's no talking you out of this. But please be careful. You're dealing with forces beyond our understanding. I nodded, grateful for her concern. I will. Thank you, Mrs. Landry, for everything. As I gathered my things to leave, a thought struck me. Mrs. Landry, do you know what happened to the Devereaux family? After the ritual, I mean. The librarian's face darkened. They disappeared, she said quietly. The entire family, gone without a trace. The house stood empty for years after that. Some say they achieved their immortality, but at a terrible price. Others believe they were the first victims of whatever they unleashed. A chill ran down my spine at her words. As I made my way out of the library, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. In the reflection of a window, I caught a glimpse of a figure standing behind me, but when I turned, there was nothing there. The sun was setting as I walked home, casting long shadows across the street. My mind raced with everything I had learned. The Devereaux family's dark obsession, the ritual gone wrong, the souls trapped between worlds. And now, somehow, I was caught in the middle of it all. As I approached my house, the Devereaux house, I paused, really looking at it for the first time since moving in. In the fading light, it seemed to loom larger than ever, its windows like dark, hungry eyes staring down at me. For a moment, I could almost see the shadows of its past overlaying the present, figures in robes chanting in candlelight, the flash of a ritual blade, the terror of those sacrificed in the name of immortality. I shuddered, forcing the images from my mind. This was my home now, and whatever horrors had occurred here in the past, I was determined to make it right. I would find the grimoire, I would learn how to close the doorway, and I would free the trapped souls. But as I stepped inside, the familiar whispers starting up almost immediately, I couldn't help but wonder, at what cost? What price would I have to pay to undo the Devereaux family's terrible legacy? The door closed behind me with a final sounding thud, and I knew there was no turning back now. Whatever lay ahead, whatever dangers I might face, I was committed to seeing this through to the end. "I'm here," I said softly to the watching shadows and listening walls. "I'm going to help you. Just show me how." As if in response, a cold breeze swept through the hallway, carrying with it the faint sound of distant weeping and the echoes of long-forgotten rituals. My journey into the heart of this house's dark mystery had only just begun, and I knew that the true challenges and horrors still lay ahead. An old woman at the market muttered voodoo when I mentioned my address. Her eyes widened with fear as she hurried away, leaving me with more questions than answers. The French Quarter Farmers Market was bustling with activity on that humid Saturday morning. Colorful stalls lined the streets, offering everything from fresh produce to handmade crafts. The air was thick with the scent of ripe fruit, fragrant herbs, and the unmistakable aroma of freshly baked beignets. I wandered through the crowd, my canvas bag already heavy with vegetables and a loaf of crusty bread. Tommy was spending the day with a friend, giving me a rare moment of solitude to run errands and clear my head. After weeks of sleepless nights and endless research, I desperately needed this semblance of normalcy. As I approached a stall selling an array of exotic spices and herbs, an elderly woman caught my eye. Her dark skin was deeply wrinkled and her white hair was wrapped in a colorful scarf. She sat behind the counter, her gnarled hands arranging small bags of dried leaves and powders. Something about her drew me in. Perhaps it was the knowing look in her eyes, or the way the other market-goers seemed to give her stall a wide berth. Whatever the reason, I found myself standing before her, inhaling the pungent scent of unfamiliar herbs. "Good morning," I said, offering a smile. "These smell wonderful. What are they used for?" The old woman's eyes crinkled as she returned my smile. "Protection, healing, luck," she replied, her voice soft and accented. "Whatever you need, child. The plants, they have power." I nodded, my fingers brushing over a bag of what looked like dried flowers. "I could use some of that," I murmured, more to myself than to her. "Trouble sleeping?" she asked, her gaze sharp and knowing. I looked up, startled. "How did you know?" She chuckled, a dry sound like rustling leaves. "The eyes never lie, child. Yours speak of many sleepless nights and heavy burdens." I hesitated, wondering how much to reveal. But something about this woman made me want to confide in her. "It's my house," I said quietly. "There's something not right about it." "Ah," she nodded sagely. "New to New Orleans, are you? Where is this house of yours?" "Cypress Street," I replied. "It's an old place, been there for—" I broke off as the woman's expression changed dramatically. Her eyes widened in fear, and she made a quick gesture with her hand that I recognized as warding off evil. "Voodoo?" she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "That place? It's cursed." My heart began to race. "What do you mean? What do you know about my house?" But the old woman was already gathering her things, her movements quick and agitated. "I'm sorry, child. I cannot help you. Stay away from that place. It's not for the living." "Wait," I called out, reaching for her arm as she turned to leave. "Please, I need to know more. What happened there? Why is it cursed?" She paused, her eyes meeting mine. For a moment I saw a flicker of pity amidst the fear. "The Devereaux house," she said softly. "It has a dark history. Terrible things happened there. Things that should not be spoken of. But I live there now," I insisted. "I hear things, voices. Please, if you know something that can help me understand." The old woman shook her head vehemently. "No, child. Some knowledge is too dangerous. If you hear voices, then it's already begun. You must leave that house before it's too late." With that, she hurried away, disappearing into the crowd and leaving me standing there, my mind reeling with more questions than ever. I spent the next hour wandering aimlessly through the market, barely noticing the vibrant sights and sounds around me. The old woman's words echoed in my head, mingling with the whispers I'd been hearing in my house. Cursed. Voodoo. Not for the living. As I turned a corner, lost in thought, I nearly collided with a tall, slender man in a crisp linen suit. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I stammered, stepping back. "No harm done, Cher," he replied with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You seem troubled. Perhaps I can be of assistance?" Something about his manner put me on edge, but I was too desperate for answers to heed my instincts. "I'm looking for information," I said cautiously, "about a house on Cypress Street, the old Devereaux place." The man's eyebrows raised slightly, a flicker of interest crossing his face. "Ah, the Devereaux house. A fascinating piece of local history. What exactly do you want to know?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. I live there now. But strange things have been happening. I was hoping to learn more about its past." "I see." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Well, you've certainly come to the right place. New Orleans is a city steeped in mystery and magic. The Devereaux house. It holds a special place in that history." "What kind of history?" I pressed, eager for any information. The man glanced around before leaning in closer. "Walk with me," he said, gesturing down a quieter side street. Against my better judgment, I followed him. We strolled past colorful Creole cottages, their wrought iron balconies dripping with lush plants. "The Devereaux family," he began, his voice low, "were once among the most powerful in New Orleans. They had wealth, influence, and a keen interest in the darker aspects of our local traditions." "You mean voodoo?" I asked, remembering the old woman's fearful muttering. He smiled thinly. "Voodoo, yes, but also darker practices. Necromancy, soul-binding, attempts to cheat death itself. The Devereaux were obsessed with immortality, you see. They believed they could unlock the secrets of eternal life through their rituals." A chill ran down my spine despite the humid air. "Did they succeed?" The man's laugh was cold and mirthless. "That depends on your definition of success, Cher. They certainly achieved something unnatural. But immortality, well, that's a tricky thing." "What happened to them?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He stopped walking, turning to face me. His eyes seemed to bore into mine, and for a moment I could have sworn they flickered with an otherworldly light. "They disappeared," he said simply. "The entire family, gone without a trace. Some say they achieved their goal and ascended to another plane of existence. Others believe they fell victim to the very forces they sought to control." I shuddered, thinking of the voices I'd been hearing. the shadows I'd seen moving in the corners of my home. And the house? What happened to it after they vanished? The man's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed just a little too sharp. It stood empty for years. No one would go near it. There were stories, you see. Whispers of unnatural sounds, of lights flickering in empty rooms, of people going missing if they ventured too close. My heart was pounding now, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. Everything he was saying aligned with my experiences, with the fragments of information I'd pieced together from my research. But eventually, he continued, people forgot. Or they convinced themselves the stories were just superstition. The house was sold and life went on. Until now, it seems. What do you mean? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. The man leaned in close, his breath cold against my ear. The house has been waiting, Cher. Waiting for someone like you. Someone who can hear them, who can feel the energy that still lingers there. The Devereaux may be gone, but their work, their grand experiment, that never ended. I stumbled back, suddenly desperate to put distance between myself and this strange man. Who are you? I demanded. How do you know all this? His laughter echoed off the buildings around us, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. Let's just say I have a vested interest in the Devereaux legacy, and in you, my dear. You're a part of this now, whether you like it or not. No. I shook my head vehemently. I want no part of this. I'll sell the house, move away. It's too late for that, he interrupted, his voice suddenly hard. The moment you stepped foot in that house, you became entangled in its fate. The voices you hear? They're just the beginning. The Devereaux opened a door, and now you must see it through to the end. Or what? I challenged, fear giving way to anger. The man's smile returned, cold and predatory. Or the consequences will be unpleasant. For you, for your son, for everyone you care about. The forces at work here are not to be trifled with, Cher. They demand resolution. Before I could respond, a commotion from the main street drew my attention. When I turned back, the man was gone, as if he'd never been there at all. I stood there for a long moment, my mind reeling. The encounter felt surreal, like a waking nightmare. But the fear coursing through my veins was all too real. As I made my way back to the busy market, my legs shaky and my breath coming in short gasps, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just stepped over a threshold. The simple life I'd hoped to build for myself and Tommy in New Orleans now seemed like a distant dream. The voices in my house, the dark history of the Devereaux family, the warnings from the old woman, and now this enigmatic stranger. It all pointed to something far more sinister than I'd imagined. I was caught in the middle of a supernatural drama that had been unfolding for over a century, and I had no idea how to extricate myself from it. As I hurried home, clutching my market bag like a shield, I knew that my real journey was just beginning. Whatever forces were at work in the Devereaux house, whatever unfinished business lingered there, I was now inextricably linked to its resolution. The warm, sunny day suddenly felt cold and oppressive. The cheerful sounds of the market faded away, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to follow me home. With each step, the weight of my new reality settled more firmly on my shoulders. I had come to New Orleans seeking a fresh start, a place where Tommy and I could build a new life. Instead, I found myself entangled in a web of dark magic, trapped souls, and century-old mysteries. As I approached my house, the Devereaux house, I steeled myself for whatever lay ahead. The voices would be waiting for me, I knew. But now, armed with this new knowledge, I was determined to uncover the truth, to find a way to end this supernatural saga once and for all. Whatever the cost, whatever dangers I might face, I had to see this through. Not just for my sake, or for Tommy's, but for all the souls who had been caught in the Devereaux family's dark ambitions. As I reached for my front door, I whispered a quiet promise to myself and to the unseen presences I knew were listening. I will find a way to set you free. All of you, no matter what it takes. The door swung open and I stepped inside, ready to face whatever supernatural challenges awaited me in the depths of the Devereaux house. Strange symbols appeared on our walls, etched in what looked unsettlingly like dried blood. I scrubbed them away, only for them to reappear the next night. The first time I noticed the symbols, I was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water in the middle of the night. A faint, coppery smell caught my attention, and as I flicked on the hallway light, I froze. There, on the wall opposite Tommy's bedroom, was a series of intricate designs that looked as if they had been painted in rust-colored ink. My heart raced as I approached, squinting in the dim light. The symbols were unlike anything I'd ever seen before, a mix of curved lines, sharp angles, and what looked like distorted letters from an alphabet I couldn't identify. But it was the medium that truly chilled me to the bone. Up close, there was no mistaking it. The symbols had been drawn in what appeared to be dried blood. "This can't be happening," I muttered to myself, reaching out a trembling hand to touch the wall. The markings were dry to the touch, slightly raised against the paint. I glanced at Tommy's closed door, relief washing over me that he hadn't woken up and seen this nightmare etched on our walls. Determined to erase all evidence before morning, I hurried to the kitchen for cleaning supplies. For the next hour, I scrubbed furiously at the wall, my mind racing with possibilities. Was this some sick prank? Had someone broken in? Or was it connected to the voices, to the dark history of the house that I'd been uncovering? By the time I finished, my arms ached and the wall was slightly discolored from my aggressive cleaning, but all traces of the symbols were gone. Exhausted and unsettled, I finally returned to bed, though sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. The next morning, I did my best to act normal as I got Tommy ready for school. As we ate breakfast, I casually asked, "Hey buddy, did you hear anything strange last night? Or see anyone in the hallway?" Tommy looked up from his cereal, brow furrowed. "No. Why? Did something happen?" I forced a smile. No, just checking. You know how Mom worries." After dropping Tommy off at school, I spent the day researching symbols and occult markings, trying to find anything that matched what I'd seen. But nothing quite fit, and by evening, I had almost convinced myself that it had been a vivid stress-induced hallucination. That illusion shattered when I went to tuck Tommy in for the night. "Mom," he said hesitantly, as I was about to turn off his light. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What do you mean by our breakthrough?" Silence answered me, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. After a moment, I turned back to the wall, determined to erase the symbols once again. But as I raised my hand to begin scrubbing, the markings seemed to shift and writhe under my gaze. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the opposite wall. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw faces in the symbols, agonized, screaming faces pushing against the wall as if it were a membrane. "No," I said firmly, squeezing my eyes shut. "This isn't real. This can't be real." When I opened my eyes, the symbols were still there, but they were once again static. With shaking hands, I set about cleaning the wall, scrubbing until my arms ached and the paint began to peel. This time, I didn't go back to bed. I sat in the hallway all night, watching the clean wall, daring the symbols to reappear. As dawn broke, I finally allowed myself to relax. The wall remained blank, but my relief was short-lived. As I stood up, stretching my stiff muscles, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. Turning slowly, I saw with horror that the symbols had appeared on every other wall in the hallway, surrounding me in a cage of blood-red markings. "Mom?" Tommy's sleepy voice came from his doorway. "What are you doing out here, and why are there drawings everywhere?" I turned to him, trying to shield him from the nightmarish sight. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Just go back to bed for a bit, okay? Mom needs to make a phone call." As soon as Tommy's door closed, I pulled out my phone with trembling hands. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Mrs. Landry, the librarian who had been helping me research the house's history. "Mrs. Landry, I'm so sorry to call this early, but something's happening, something I can't explain. I need your help." Her voice was groggy but alert. Sarah, what's wrong? Has something happened at the house? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. There are symbols appearing on the walls, symbols drawn in what looks like blood. I clean them off, but they keep coming back. And last night, I think I saw faces in them. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Mrs. Landry spoke again, her voice was grave. Sarah, listen to me very carefully. Do not touch those symbols again. Don't try to clean them. Don't interact with them in any way. I'm coming over right now. But what about Tommy? I can't let him see this. Take him to a neighbor's house if you can. Say there's a problem with the plumbing or something. Just get him out of there for now. An hour later, Mrs. Landry arrived at my door. She looked pale and worried, clutching a large, leather-bound book to her chest. Show me, she said without preamble. I led her to the hallway, where the symbols still covered every wall. Mrs. Landry's eyes widened as she took in the sight. Oh, Sarah, she breathed. What have you gotten yourself into? You know what these are? I asked, hope and fear mingling in my chest. She nodded slowly, opening the book she'd brought. They're voodoo symbols, but corrupted, twisted into something dark and unnatural. She flipped through the pages, comparing the markings in the book to those on my walls. This is old magic, Sarah. Powerful and dangerous. But what does it mean? Why are they appearing here? Mrs. Landry's expression was grim. From what I can tell, these are boundary markings. They're meant to strengthen the veil between our world and something else. The spirit world, perhaps, or something even darker. I shuddered, remembering the faces I thought I'd seen pushing against the wall. Are they keeping something out or in? Both, I think, she replied. The Devereaux family's rituals. They must have weakened the boundaries between worlds. These symbols are like scar tissue, a magical attempt to hold things together. But why now? Why are they appearing all of a sudden? Mrs. Landry turned to me, her eyes serious. Because the boundary is failing, Sarah. Whatever the Devereaux did, whatever they unleashed, it's trying to break through. And for some reason, you're at the center of it all. I sank to the floor, overwhelmed. What am I supposed to do? How do I stop this? She sat down beside me, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. I don't know, dear. But we'll figure it out together. For now, we need to reinforce these symbols, make them stronger. How? I don't know anything about voodoo or magic. Mrs. Landry smiled sadly. No, but I do. My grandmother, she taught me a few things. Things I never thought I'd need to use. She stood up, straightening her shoulders. First, we need supplies, salt, sage, candles, and I'm afraid we'll need a small amount of your blood. I blanched. My blood? Why? To bind the protection to you and your son, to make it personal. As we gathered the supplies, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Shadows seemed to move at the corners of my vision, and more than once I could have sworn I heard whispers just beyond the edge of hearing. We worked through the day, Mrs. Landry guiding me through the process of reinforcing each symbol. We sprinkled salt, burned sage, and yes, added a drop of my blood to each marking. As we worked, the air in the house grew thick and heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. By nightfall, we had finished. The symbols glowed faintly in the dim light, pulsing with a power I could feel thrumming through the air. It's done, Mrs. Landry said, her voice weary. This should hold them back, at least for now. Thank you, I said, fighting back tears of exhaustion and relief. I don't know what I would have done without you. She squeezed my hand. This isn't over, Sarah. These symbols, they're a bandage on a much deeper wound. We need to find out what the Devereaux did and how to undo it. Otherwise what? Mrs. Landry's eyes met mine, filled with a mix of fear and determination. Otherwise, the boundary will keep weakening, and when it fails completely, God help us all. As she left, I stood in the hallway, surrounded by the glowing symbols that now felt more like a prison than a protection. I knew that this was just the beginning of a journey into darkness, a battle against forces I barely understood. But as I heard Tommy's key in the lock, signaling his return from the neighbor's house, I steeled myself for what lay ahead. Whatever it took, whatever price I had to pay, I would solve this mystery and put an end to the Devereaux legacy, for Tommy's sake, and for my own. The symbols pulsed one last time, as if in acknowledgement of my silent vow. And somewhere just beyond the veil of reality, I could have sworn I heard a chorus of voices, some pleading, some threatening, all demanding to be heard. The battle for my home, and perhaps for the very fabric of reality itself, had truly begun. My son's behavior changed. He spoke of new friends who visited him at night, friends whose descriptions made my blood run cold. I first noticed the change in Tommy about a week after the symbols appeared on our walls. He had always been a cheerful, outgoing child, but suddenly he became withdrawn and quiet. Dark circles appeared under his eyes, and he picked at his food during meals. One morning, as I was pouring his cereal, I decided to broach the subject. "Tommy, honey, is everything okay? You seem a little different lately." He looked up at me, his eyes shadowed and serious in a way that no 8-year-olds should be. "I'm fine, Mom. Just tired." "Are you having trouble sleeping?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual even as worry gnawed at my insides. Tommy shrugged, pushing his cereal around in the bowl. "Sometimes, the voices keep me up." My blood ran cold. "Voices? What voices, sweetie?" He looked at me as if I were being particularly dense. "The ones that come at night, my new friends." I sat down heavily in the chair across from him, my heart pounding. "Can you tell me about these friends?" Tommy's face lit up for the first time in days. "They're really interesting, Mom. There's a lady in an old-fashioned dress who sings lullabies and a man with a funny accent who tells stories about the old days in New Orleans. And there's a boy about my age who wants to play, but he's always so sad." I struggled to keep my expression neutral, even as panic clawed at my throat. "That sounds nice, honey. And you can see these friends?" He shook his head. "Not really see them. It's more like I can feel them, and hear them, of course. They come out of the walls at night." "Out of the walls," I repeated faintly. The walls where those terrifying symbols kept appearing. "Tommy, do these friends ever ask you to do anything?" His brow furrowed. "Sometimes they ask me to help them. They say they're trapped and need to get out, but I don't know how to help them." He looked up at me, his eyes suddenly brimming with tears. "Mom, why are they so sad? Why can't they leave?" I pulled him into a tight hug, my mind racing. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I promise I'm going to figure it out. In the meantime, if these friends say anything that scares you or asks you to do anything that makes you uncomfortable, you tell me right away, okay?" He nodded against my shoulder. "Okay, Mom. Can I go play now?" I released him, watching as he trudged off to the living room. As soon as he was out of earshot, I pulled out my phone and dialed Mrs. Landry. "Sarah? Is everything all right?" Her voice was thick with concern. "No," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "It's Tommy. He's hearing the voices too, seeing things. He says they come out of the walls at night." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Mrs. Landry spoke again, her voice was grave. "This is worse than I feared. The boundary must be weakening faster than we thought. Sarah, you need to get Tommy out of that house." "And go where?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "This is our home, and whatever's happening, it seems tied to me somehow. How do I know it won't just follow us?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But at least for tonight, bring him to my house. I have some additional protections we can try." That night, as I tucked Tommy into the guest bed at Mrs. Landry's house, I tried to sound cheerful. "Isn't this fun? Like a little vacation?" Tommy looked around the unfamiliar room, his expression uncertain. I guess. But Mom, what about my friends? Won't they be lonely without me? I swallowed hard. I'm sure they'll be fine for one night, sweetie. Try to get some sleep, okay? As I turned to leave, Tommy's small voice stopped me. Mom, the boy, he says he knows you. He says you're the key to setting them free. I froze, my hand on the doorknob. What do you mean, honey? But Tommy had already rolled over, his eyes closed. Within moments, his breathing had evened out into sleep. I made my way downstairs, where Mrs. Landry was waiting with a steaming cup of tea and a sympathetic expression. He's asleep, I said, collapsing onto the couch. But before he dozed off, he said something about me being the key to setting them free. Mrs. Landry nodded slowly. I was afraid of this. Sarah, I think it's time I showed you something. She crossed to an old roll-top desk in the corner and pulled out a worn leather journal. This belonged to my grandmother. She knew the Devereaux family. My eyes widened. What? Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I wasn't sure how much of it was true, she said, sitting down beside me. My grandmother had a tendency to embellish. But given what's been happening, I think we need to take her accounts seriously. She opened the journal, flipping through pages covered in spidery handwriting. According to this, the Devereaux family was obsessed with the idea of immortality. They believed they could achieve it through a combination of voodoo rituals and arcane magic from other traditions. But something went wrong, I guessed. Mrs. Landry nodded. Terribly wrong. They managed to open a doorway between our world and something else. A place where souls lingered, trapped between life and death. But they couldn't control it. Souls started pouring through. Some of the Devereaux' ancestors, but also darker entities that had never been human. I shuddered, remembering the terrifying faces I'd seen in the symbols on my walls. So what happened? The Devereaux family disappeared, she said. Some say they were pulled through the doorway. Others believe they sacrificed themselves to close it. But according to my grandmother's journal, they didn't close it entirely. They merely contained it within the house. My house, I whispered. Yes. And now, for some reason, that containment is failing. The souls trapped on the other side are trying to break through, and they seem to think you're the key to their release. I stood up, pacing the room as I tried to process this information. But why me? I'm nobody special. I don't know anything about magic or voodoo or any of this. Mrs. Landry's expression was sympathetic but firm. I don't know why you, Sarah, but it's clear that you have some connection to all of this. The voices, the symbols, they're all centered around you and Tommy. I sank back onto the couch, my head in my hands. So what do we do? How do we stop this? I'm not sure we can stop it, Mrs. Landry said quietly. But we might be able to control it, to finish what the Devereaux family started. I looked up at her, fear and determination warring in my chest. How? We need to find the original ritual, the one they used to open the doorway in the first place. If we can understand how they did it, we might be able to figure out how to close it properly. And where do we find that? Mrs. Landry's expression was grim. In the house. Somewhere in your house there must be records of what they did. We need to find them. I nodded slowly, a plan beginning to form in my mind. Okay. Tomorrow we go back. We search every inch of that house until we find what we need. As if in response to my words, a cold breeze swept through the room, making the flames in the fireplace flicker. For a moment I could have sworn I saw faces in the shadows watching us with hungry eyes. Mrs. Landry shivered. We need to be careful, Sarah. The entities on the other side, they're not all benevolent. Some of them are dangerous, evil, even. If we open that doorway without being prepared, we could unleash something terrible on the world. I understand, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. But we have to try. for Tommy's sake, if nothing else. I can't let those things keep whispering to him, trying to use him. We spent the rest of the night planning, poring over Mrs. Landry's grandmother's journal for any clues that might help us. As dawn broke, we were exhausted but determined. I went to wake Tommy, steeling myself for the day ahead. As I opened the door to the guest room, I froze. The walls were covered in the same symbols that had appeared in our house, glowing faintly in the early morning light. Tommy sat in the center of the bed, his eyes wide and unfocused. "They followed us, Mom," he said, his voice eerily calm. "They say it's time for you to set them free." I rushed to him, gathering him in my arms. "It's okay, sweetie. Everything's going to be okay." But as I held him, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. Whatever was on the other side of that doorway was getting stronger, more insistent, and somehow I was the key to either saving us all or unleashing a horror beyond imagination. As we prepared to return to the house, I made a silent vow. I would solve this mystery, I would close that doorway, and I would protect my son. No matter what it took, no matter what price I had to pay. The battle for our souls, and perhaps for the very fabric of reality, was about to begin. And I was determined to win. I found a hidden room in the basement, filled with arcane artifacts and the lingering scent of decay. The voices grew louder here, almost deafening. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I discovered the room. Tommy was at school, and I had taken the day off work to continue my frantic search for answers. The basement had always been a dark, musty space that we rarely used, filled with old boxes and the previous owner's discarded junk. But something drew me there that day, a whisper at the edge of my consciousness that I couldn't ignore. As I descended the creaky wooden stairs, the air grew thick and heavy, charged with an energy that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The voices, which had become a constant background murmur in the house, seemed to grow more insistent with each step I took. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the dimly lit space, more insistent, and somehow I was the key to either saving us all or unleashing a horror beyond imagination. As we prepared to return to the house, I made a silent vow. I would solve this mystery, I would close that doorway, and I would protect my son. No matter what it took, no matter what price I had to pay. The battle for our souls, and perhaps for the very fabric of reality, was about to begin. And I was determined to win. I found a hidden room in the basement, filled with arcane artifacts and the lingering scent of decay. The voices grew louder here, almost deafening. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I discovered the room. Tommy was at school, and I had taken the day off work to continue my frantic search for answers. The basement had always been a dark, musty space that we rarely used, filled with old boxes and the previous owner's discarded junk. But something drew me there that day, a whisper at the edge of my consciousness that I couldn't ignore. As I descended the creaky wooden stairs, the air grew thick and heavy, charged with an energy that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The voices, which had become a constant background murmur in the house, seemed to grow more insistent with each step I took. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the dimly lit space. "Is someone there?" No answer came, but the whispers intensified, a cacophony of pleading and warnings that I couldn't quite make out. I fumbled for the light switch, and the bare bulb flickered to life, casting long shadows across the cluttered room. That's when I noticed it. A faint line in the far wall that didn't quite match the rest of the basement's rough stonework. Heart pounding, I approached, running my fingers along the seam. It was almost imperceptible, but definitely there. "A door," I whispered to myself. "There's a hidden door here." The voices crescendoed as I explored the wall, searching for some mechanism to open it. My fingers brushed against a small indentation, and suddenly, with a grinding of stone on stone, the wall began to move. Dust billowed out as the hidden door swung open, and I coughed, waving my hand in front of my face. As the air cleared, I peered into the darkness beyond, fumbling for my phone to use as a flashlight. The beam of light revealed a small room, no larger than a walk-in closet, but what it contained made my blood run cold. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with objects that looked like they belonged in a museum of the occult. Strange statues, jars filled with unidentifiable substances, books bound in materials I didn't want to contemplate too closely. And the smell, a cloying mix of decay and something metallic that reminded me unsettlingly of blood. "Oh my God," I breathed, taking a tentative step into the room. "What is this place?" As if in answer, the voices surged, becoming clearer than they had ever been before. "The sanctum," they whispered in unison. "You've found it at last." "Who are you?" I demanded, spinning around, trying to locate the source of the voices. "What do you want from me?" "Freedom," came the reply, seeming to emanate from every object in the room. "Release. We've waited so long." I stumbled backward, overwhelmed by the intensity of their pleas. My elbow knocked against one of the shelves, and a small, ornate box tumbled to the floor. It sprang open as it hit the ground, and a cloud of what looked like ash puffed out. Immediately, the air in the room seemed to thicken, shimmering like a heat haze. And in that shimmer, I saw faces forming, dozens of them, all with expressions of anguish and desperation. "Help us," they cried, their voices now distinct and individual. "Please, you must complete the ritual. Set us free." I pressed myself against the wall, my heart racing. "What ritual? I don't understand." One face pushed forward, that of an elderly man with deep-set eyes and a long white beard. When he spoke, his voice was stronger than the others, more focused. "You are the key, child," he said. "The last of the Devereaux line, whether you know it or not. Only you can undo what was done." "But I'm not a Devereaux," I protested. "My name is Sarah Collins. I just bought this house a few months ago." The old man's expression was pitying. "Blood tells, child. The sins of the fathers and mothers. You carry the legacy, whether you wish to or not." Another face surged forward, this one a young woman with wild eyes and tangled hair. "You must help us," she shrieked. "We cannot bear this limbo any longer." I slid down the wall, hugging my knees to my chest. "I don't know how," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't know anything about rituals or magic. I'm just me." The old man's face softened. "The knowledge is within you, child. In your blood, in your bones. You need only to awaken it." "How?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "The grimoire," he replied. "Find the Devereaux grimoire. It contains all you need to know." I looked around the cluttered room. "Is it here? In this room?" The faces shimmered, looking uncertain. We cannot see as you do," the old man said. "Our perception is limited, but we feel its presence nearby. Search, child. Search and you will find." With shaking legs, I stood and began to examine the shelves more closely. Books of all sizes and bindings filled them, many in languages I didn't recognize. I pulled them out one by one, flipping through pages filled with diagrams and incantations that made my head spin. As I reached for a particularly large volume bound in what looked disturbingly like human skin, a voice behind me made me jump. "Sarah, are you down here?" I whirled around to see Mrs. Landry standing in the doorway of the hidden room, her eyes wide with shock. "Mrs. Landry, I found this room. It was hidden behind a fake wall and—" My voice trailed off as I realized the shimmering faces were gone. The air once again still and heavy with dust and decay. Mrs. Landry stepped cautiously into the room, her gaze sweeping over the arcane objects. "Oh, Sarah," she breathed. "Do you realize what you found?" I shook my head, still trying to process everything that had just happened. "I'm not sure. There were voices, faces. They said I needed to find something called the Devereaux grimoire, that it would tell me how to free them." Mrs. Landry's face paled. "The Devereaux grimoire? Sarah, that book is incredibly dangerous. It contains some of the darkest magic ever practiced in New Orleans. But if it can help me understand what's happening, if it can show me how to stop all this. She gripped my arm, her eyes intense. Sarah, listen to me. The entities trapped in this house, they're not all benevolent. Some of them are dangerous, evil even. If you free them without understanding the consequences, you could unleash something terrible on the world. I sank down onto a dusty old trunk, my head in my hands. Then what am I supposed to do? I can't just ignore this. They're in my head, in Tommy's head. We can't live like this. Mrs. Landry's expression softened. She sat down next to me, putting a comforting arm around my shoulders. I know, dear, and we will figure this out. But we need to be careful, methodical. We can't rush into anything. I nodded, taking a deep breath to steady myself. Okay, so what's our next step? Well, she said, looking around the room, I think we need to catalog everything in here. See if we can find any clues about what exactly the Devereaux family was trying to do and how it went wrong. We spent the next few hours carefully examining and documenting every object in the hidden room. Mrs. Landry's knowledge proved invaluable. She was able to identify many of the stranger items and explain their significance in various magical traditions. As the afternoon wore on, we had filled several notebooks with observations and sketches, but we were no closer to finding the grimoire or understanding how to help the trapped souls. Frustrated, I slumped against the wall. This is hopeless. We're never going to figure this out. As my hand brushed against the rough stone, I felt something shift. A small section of the wall moved under my touch. Mrs. Landry, I called, excitement creeping into my voice. I think I found something. She hurried over as I pressed against the loose stone. With a grinding sound, it slid inward, revealing a small hidden compartment. And there, nestled in the darkness, was a book. Its cover was black leather, worn with age, and emblazoned with a symbol that matched the ones that had appeared on our walls. The Devereaux grimoire, Mrs. Landry whispered, her voice a mix of awe and fear. With trembling hands, I reached for the book. As my fingers touched its cover, a jolt of energy surged through me. The voices, which had been mercifully quiet during our search, suddenly roared to life. Yes, they cried in unison. The key. You found it. The room began to shimmer again, faces forming in the air around us. Mrs. Landry gasped, stumbling backward. Sarah, she said, her voice shaking. Sarah, we need to leave, now. But I could barely hear her over the cacophony of voices. They were all speaking at once, some pleading, some demanding, some offering dark promises of power and knowledge. Silence, I shouted, surprising myself with the authority in my voice. To my shock, the voices obeyed, falling into an expectant hush. The old man's face formed in front of me, his expression solemn. You hold our fate in your hands, child, he said. Will you help us? I looked down at the grimoire, then back at the shimmering faces surrounding me. In that moment, I knew that my life would never be the same. Whatever I chose to do next would set me on a path I could never turn back from. I'll help you, I said finally, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. But on my terms. I need to understand what I'm doing, and I won't release anything that could harm others. The old man nodded, a look of relief washing over his ghostly features. That is all we ask. Study the grimoire, child, learn its secrets, and when you are ready, we will guide you through the ritual. As the faces faded away, I turned to Mrs. Landry. She was staring at me with a mixture of fear and admiration. Sarah, she said softly, are you sure about this? Once you start down this path. I nodded, clutching the grimoire to my chest. I'm sure. I don't think we have a choice anymore. Whatever the Devereaux family started, I have to finish it, for Tommy's sake and for all the souls trapped here. As we left the hidden room, grimoire in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was crossing a threshold. The normal life I had hoped to build in New Orleans now seemed like a distant dream. But as frightening as the path ahead seemed, I also felt a strange sense of purpose. For better or worse, I was now part of something larger than myself, and I was determined to see it through to the end, whatever the cost. The package sat on my doorstep, innocuous yet foreboding. No return address, no postmark, just my name scrawled in spidery handwriting that sent a chill down my spine. With trembling hands, I brought it inside, my son's voice echoing from the living room. "Mom, what's that?" "Nothing, sweetie. Just some mail." I retreated to the kitchen, heart pounding. The voices from the drains had fallen silent, as if holding their breath in anticipation. Carefully, I unwrapped the package, revealing an ancient leather-bound tome. Its cover was etched with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift as I stared at them. As I opened the book, a whisper escaped its pages, barely audible yet unmistakable. "Finally." My hands shook as I leafed through the yellowed pages, filled with intricate diagrams and text in a language I couldn't comprehend, yet somehow I understood. This was a book of rituals, dark, ancient voodoo practices that promised power and communion with forces beyond our world. "Sarah." The voice from the drain was back, more insistent than ever. "You have it now. You can free us." I slammed the book shut, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "Who sent this? What do you want from me?" The voice chuckled, a sound like bones rattling in a tomb. "We sent it, Sarah. We've been waiting for someone like you, someone who can hear us, who can set us free." "And if I refuse?" A moment of silence, then, "Do you really think you have a choice? Look at your son, Sarah. Really look at him." Cold dread washed over me as I peered into the living room. My son sat on the floor playing with his toys, but something was off. His movements were jerky, unnatural, and his eyes were pitch black. "What have you done to him?" I hissed. "Nothing. Yet. But we can, Sarah. We can do so much worse if you don't help us." I clutched the book to my chest, torn between terror and a desperate need to protect my child. "What do I need to do?" The voice seemed to smile, a grotesque sound that made my skin crawl. "Read the book, Sarah. Learn the rituals. Prepare yourself for what's to come." As if compelled by an unseen force, I opened the book again. The symbols began to make sense, the foreign words becoming clear in my mind. I read of ancient sacrifices, of souls trapped between worlds, of the power to command spirits and bend reality itself. Hours passed, the sun setting outside as I delved deeper into the forbidden knowledge. My son's voice startled me from my trance. "Mom? I'm hungry." I looked up, relieved to see his eyes were normal again. "Of course, sweetie. I'll make dinner right away." As I prepared the meal, my mind raced with the implications of what I'd read. The ritual to free the trapped souls was complex, dangerous, and required sacrifices I wasn't sure I could make. "You have no choice," the drain whispered. "You've read the book. You're part of this now." "Leave me alone," I muttered, setting plates on the table. My son looked up at me, concern in his young eyes. "Who are you talking to, Mom?" I forced a smile. "No one, honey. Just thinking out loud." As we ate, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed deeper, more alive. The book lay on the counter, its presence a weight on my conscience. After tucking my son into bed, I returned to the kitchen, drawn inexorably back to the tome. As I opened it once more, a slip of paper fell out, a note I hadn't noticed before. "Beware the price of knowledge," it read. "Once begun, this path cannot be abandoned." I sank to the floor, the book in my lap, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what lay ahead. The voices from the drains began again, a chorus of pleas and demands. "Read, Sarah, prepare. The ritual must be performed on the next full moon." I looked at the calendar on the wall, my heart sinking. The full moon was just 2 weeks away. "I don't know if I can do this," I whispered. You must, the voices insisted. For your son, for yourself, for all of us. As the night deepened, I lost myself in the pages of the book, the arcane knowledge seeping into my very being. With each passing hour, I felt myself changing, seeing the world through new eyes. The path ahead was dark and treacherous, but I knew there was no turning back now. The book had chosen me, and with it came a terrible responsibility. As dawn broke, I finally understood the true cost of the ritual that lay ahead and the devastating choice I would have to make. Sleepless nights had become my new reality. The line between waking and dreaming blurred into a hazy nightmare from which I couldn't escape. The voices from the drains, once confined to the quiet hours of darkness, now haunted me ceaselessly. They whispered, pleaded, and sometimes screamed, their desperation seeping into every corner of my consciousness. I stumbled through my days in a fog, barely able to focus on the mundane tasks of life. My son, bless his innocent heart, noticed the change in me. "Mommy, are you sick?" he asked one morning, his small hand reaching up to touch my face. I forced a smile, trying to hide the dark circles under my eyes. "No, sweetie. Mommy's just a little tired. Everything's fine." But everything was far from fine. As I poured his cereal, my hands shook, spilling milk across the counter. The drain gurgled, and I could have sworn I heard laughter. "Liar! Liar!" a voice hissed. "You're falling apart, Sarah. How long before you crack completely?" I gripped the edge of the sink, knuckles white. "Shut up," I muttered through gritted teeth. "Mom." My son's voice snapped me back to reality. "Who are you talking to?" I turned, plastering on another fake smile. "No one, honey, just thinking out loud. Eat your breakfast, okay? You'll be late for school." As I drove him to school, the voices followed, whispering from the car's air vents. I cranked up the radio, desperate to drown them out, but they persisted, their words weaving between the notes of pop songs. "You can't ignore us forever, Sarah. We're part of you now." I dropped my son off with a distracted kiss, then pulled over a block away, my head in my hands. How had my life come to this? Just weeks ago, I was a normal single mother, trying to make a fresh start in a new city. Now, I was losing my grip on sanity, plagued by voices that shouldn't exist. The book of rituals sat heavy in my bag, its presence a constant reminder of the choice looming before me. I'd spent nights poring over its pages, trying to understand the complexities of the voodoo ritual that might free the trapped souls. But the more I learned, the more terrified I became. I drove aimlessly through the streets of New Orleans, the city's vibrant energy, a stark contrast to the darkness consuming me. I found myself parking near a small, dimly lit shop, tucked between a laundromat and a boarded-up storefront. The sign above the door read Madame Laveau's Curiosities, in faded gold lettering. As I pushed open the door, a bell tinkled softly. The shop was cluttered with an eclectic mix of items: crystals, dried herbs, antique dolls with unsettling glass eyes. The air was thick with the scent of incense. "Can I help you, child?" The voice came from behind a beaded curtain, and a moment later an elderly woman emerged. Her dark skin was etched with deep wrinkles, and her eyes held a wisdom that seemed to peer right through me. I'm not sure," I stammered. "I think I might be going crazy." The old woman clicked her tongue. "Crazy is a strong word. Tell me what troubles you." And so, in that strange little shop, I found myself pouring out my story. I told her about the voices in the drains, the book of rituals, the trapped souls begging for release. To my surprise, she listened without judgment, nodding occasionally. When I finished, she sighed deeply. "You've stumbled into something dark and old, child. The spirits that haunt your home are not to be trifled with." "Then what can I do?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "I can't live like this. I'm afraid I'll lose my son, my sanity." Madame Laveau, if that was indeed her name, moved to a cluttered shelf and began gathering items: candles, herbs, a small cloth bag. "I can give you something to help quiet the voices, to give you some peace." but it's only temporary. The real solution lies in that book you carry. I clutched my bag tighter. You know about the ritual? She nodded gravely. I know of it. It's powerful, dangerous magic, the kind that demands a hefty price. My soul, I whispered. That's what the voices say. To free them, I have to trade my own soul. Perhaps, she said, her eyes softening with sympathy. But remember, child, in matters of the spirit, things are rarely so simple. The choice may not be as clear-cut as you think. She pressed the items into my hands. Use these tonight. Light the candles. Burn the herbs. It will give you a reprieve, time to think clearly. But be warned, the spirits will not be silent for long. They will return, angrier for being ignored. I thanked her, paying for the items with shaking hands. As I turned to leave, she called out one last time. Sarah. I froze. I hadn't told her my name. Be careful. The path you walk is treacherous. Trust your instincts and remember, love is the most powerful magic of all. I left the shop in a daze, her words echoing in my mind. The drive home was a blur, the voices mercifully quiet as if they knew what I carried. That night, after tucking my son into bed, I followed Madame Laveau's instructions. I lit the candles, burned the herbs, and for the first time in weeks, I slept without dreams. But peace, as she had warned, was fleeting. I awoke in the dark hours before dawn to a cacophony of angry voices. You dare to silence us? They raged. We who have suffered for so long, trapped between worlds? I curled into a ball, hands over my ears, but their fury was inescapable. You will pay for this insolence, Sarah. Look to your son. See what defiance has wrought. Terror gripped me as I raced to my son's room. He thrashed in his bed, caught in the throes of a nightmare, his small body drenched in sweat. No, I pleaded. Leave him out of this. He's innocent. No one is innocent, the voices hissed. Perform the ritual, Sarah. Free us or watch your son suffer. I gathered my boy in my arms, rocking him as he whimpered in his sleep. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the true cost of my situation. It wasn't just my soul at stake. It was my son's future, his safety, his very life. The next few days passed in a haze of fear and preparation. I scoured the book of rituals, memorizing every detail, gathering the necessary items. All the while, the voices taunted me, reminding me of the consequences of failure. I began to see things, shadowy figures at the corners of my vision, faces peering out from mirrors. The house itself seemed to come alive, creaking and groaning as if in pain. My son grew increasingly withdrawn, plagued by nightmares he couldn't articulate. I found him talking to empty corners, his toys arranged in strange, symbolic patterns. Who are you talking to, sweetie? I asked one afternoon, trying to keep the fear from my voice. He looked at me with eyes too old for his young face. The sad people, Mommy. They're everywhere. They say you can help them. I pulled him close, my heart breaking. I'm trying, baby. I'm trying so hard. As the day of the ritual drew near, I made my final preparations. I sent my son to stay with a neighbor, ignoring his tearful protests. I couldn't risk him being in the house when whatever was going to happen, happened. The night of the full moon arrived, heavy with foreboding. I drew the symbols on the floor as the book instructed, my hand steady despite my racing heart. Candles flickered in a circle around me, casting dancing shadows on the walls. As the clock struck midnight, I began the chant. The words felt foreign on my tongue, yet they flowed as if I'd known them all my life. The air grew thick, charged with an energy that made my skin prickle. The voices rose in a chorus, no longer confined to the drains, but filling the entire house. I saw them then, ghostly figures emerging from the walls, the floor, wisps of tortured souls trapped for who knows how long. Free us, they pleaded. Release us from this torment. I continued the chant, my voice growing stronger as the ritual reached its climax. The spectral figures swirled around me, their faces contorted in anguish and hope. And then, silence. A moment of perfect, absolute quiet. A figure coalesced before me, more solid than the others. A woman, her eyes deep pools of sorrow. "You've done well, Sarah," she said, her voice echoing as if from a great distance. "But now comes the true test. Are you willing to pay the price for our freedom?" I hesitated, thinking of my son, of the life we'd hoped to build here. What exactly am I trading? My soul? My life? The woman smiled sadly. "Not quite. Your soul is your own, Sarah. What we require is your connection to this world, your memories, your bonds, your very identity. You'll live, but as a stranger to yourself and all who knew you." The realization hit me like a physical blow. To save these souls, to protect my son from their influence, I would have to become a ghost in my own life. Tears streamed down my face as I nodded. I agree. But please, watch over my son. Let him know that his mother loved him, even if she can't remember him." The woman reached out, her ethereal hand touching my forehead. "It is done. Thank you, Sarah. Your sacrifice will not be forgotten, even if you forget yourself." A blinding light filled the room, and I felt myself falling into an abyss of lost memories and fading connections. When I opened my eyes, the house was quiet. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating a room I didn't recognize. I stood, disoriented, trying to piece together who I was, why I was here. A photo on the mantel caught my eye, a woman and a young boy, both smiling. I stared at it, feeling a tug of something I couldn't quite grasp. The woman looked like me, but I felt no connection to her or the child. As I wandered through the unfamiliar house, I caught sight of my reflection in a mirror. The face that looked back was my own, yet somehow foreign. I touched my cheek, wondering at the tears I found there. In that moment, I understood the true nature of sacrifice. I had given up everything to free those trapped souls, to protect a child I no longer knew. As I stood in the quiet house, a stranger to myself, I wondered if it had been worth it. But deep down, in a place untouched by the ritual's power, I felt a flicker of peace. Whatever I had lost, whatever I had become, I had made a choice born of love and desperation. And in that choice perhaps lay my salvation. The streets of New Orleans pulsed with an otherworldly energy as I made my way through the French Quarter. The voices that had plagued me for weeks now guided my steps, leading me to a dilapidated shotgun house on a narrow cobblestone street. The peeling paint and sagging porch seemed to whisper of secrets long buried. I hesitated at the gate, my hand trembling as I reached for the rusted latch. A voice from the drain pipe near my feet hissed, "Go on, Sarah. She's waiting for you." Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the gate and approached the front door. Before I could knock, it swung open, revealing a woman whose age was impossible to determine. Her dark skin was etched with intricate tattoos, and her eyes held a wisdom that seemed to span centuries. "Come in, child," she said, her voice like rough velvet. "The spirits told me you were coming." I followed her into a dimly lit room, heavy with the scent of incense and herbs. Candles flickered on every surface, casting dancing shadows on walls covered in strange symbols. "You're a voodoo practitioner?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The woman smiled, revealing teeth stained dark with some unknown substance. "I am Marie, and I am many things. But yes, the old ways are my ways. And you, Sarah, have stumbled into a world you don't understand." I sank into a worn armchair, suddenly exhausted. The voices, they won't leave me alone. They say they're trapped souls, that I need to free them. But I don't know how, and I'm afraid of what it might cost me. Marie nodded solemnly. "Your fear is wise, child. The souls that speak to you are indeed trapped, caught between worlds by a ritual gone wrong many years ago. They seek release, but such freedom comes at a great price. What kind of price? I asked, dreading the answer. Marie's eyes seemed to look through me, seeing things I couldn't comprehend. The ritual to free them is complex and dangerous. It requires a willing vessel, someone to take on their pain, their torment. In freeing them, you risk trapping yourself. A chill ran down my spine. You mean I could end up like them? Trapped? It's possible, Marie admitted. But there's more. The ritual also demands a sacrifice, a piece of your very essence. Your memories, your connections to this world, all could be lost. I thought of my son, of the life we'd built. The idea of forgetting him, of becoming a stranger to my own child, was almost too much to bear. Isn't there another way? I pleaded. Marie shook her head slowly. The old magics are not kind, Sarah. They demand balance. To free a soul, another must take its place. Or in this case, to free many, one must give up much. As if sensing my turmoil, the voices in my head began to clamor, their pleas growing more desperate. Please, Sarah, they begged. We've suffered for so long. You're our only hope. I pressed my hands to my temples, trying to quiet the cacophony. How do I know this is real? That I'm not just going crazy? Marie reached out, her hand surprisingly warm as it grasped mine. Let me show you, she said. The world seemed to shift, colors bleeding into one another. Suddenly, I could see them, translucent figures crowding the room, their faces etched with pain and longing. Men, women, children, souls trapped out of time, reaching out with insubstantial hands. Oh God, I gasped, tears streaming down my face. They're real. They're all real. As quickly as it had come, the vision faded. I found myself back in Marie's cluttered room, shaken to my core. Now you see, Marie said softly, the choice before you is real, and it is heavy. To free these souls, you must be willing to sacrifice much of yourself. I stood on shaky legs, my mind reeling. I need time to think. This is too much. Marie nodded understandingly. Take the time you need, child. But know this, the longer you wait, the stronger their hold on this world becomes. And the danger to you, and to those you love, grows with each passing day. As I turned to leave, Marie pressed a small cloth bag into my hand. For protection, she explained. It won't silence the voices, but it will give you some peace to think clearly. I clutched the bag tightly, grateful for even this small comfort. Thank you, I whispered. At the door, I paused, looking back at the enigmatic woman who had confirmed my worst fears and greatest hopes. If I decide to do this, will you help me? Marie's face was solemn in the flickering candlelight. I will guide you as best I can, Sarah, but the journey is yours alone. The choice must be yours, and yours alone. As I stepped back into the humid New Orleans night, the weight of the decision before me felt almost unbearable. The voices were quieter now, muted by whatever magic Marie had given me, but I could still feel their presence, their desperate need for release. I thought of my son, of the life we'd hoped to build in this vibrant, haunted city. Could I risk losing everything to free these trapped souls? Could I live with myself if I didn't? The path ahead was dark and uncertain, fraught with danger I could barely comprehend. But as I made my way home through the gaslit streets, I knew that I had already taken the first steps on a journey from which there was no turning back. The full moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow through the windows of my New Orleans home. I stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by an array of items I'd spent weeks collecting. Black candles, herbs I couldn't pronounce, a silver atame, and vials of murky liquids I dared not examine too closely. My hands trembled as I opened the ancient book of rituals, its pages crackling with age and dark energy. The voices from the drains had fallen silent, as if holding their collective breath in anticipation. It's time, I whispered to the empty room. God help me. It's time. As I began to draw the intricate symbols on the floor with chalk, A cold breeze swept through the room, extinguishing several candles. I relit them with shaking hands, my heart pounding in my chest. "Mom?" My son's voice startled me, and I whirled around to see him standing in the doorway, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "What are you doing?" "Go back to bed, sweetie," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Mommy's just cleaning." He frowned, his young face scrunching up in confusion. "It doesn't look like cleaning. And why are you talking funny?" I realized I'd been muttering the ritual words under my breath without even realizing it. "It's nothing, honey, please just go back to bed. Everything will be okay in the morning." As I ushered him back to his room, a voice hissed from the nearest air vent. "Hurry, Sarah. The moon's power wanes. We cannot wait another cycle." I tucked my son in, kissing his forehead and fighting back tears. "I love you," I whispered. "No matter what happens, always remember that." Returning to the living room, I took a deep breath and began the ritual in earnest. The words of the incantation felt strange on my tongue, a language both ancient and terrifyingly alive. As I spoke, the air grew thick and heavy, charged with an energy that made my skin prickle. Suddenly, the room erupted into chaos. Spectral figures poured from every drain, vent, and crack in the walls. Their faces were contorted in anguish, their ethereal forms swirling around me in a macabre dance. "Free us!" they cried in unison. "Complete the ritual, Sarah!" I continued chanting, my voice growing stronger even as fear threatened to overwhelm me. The candles flared, their flames stretching impossibly high. The symbols I'd drawn began to glow with an unearthly light. As I reached the climax of the ritual, a figure coalesced before me. A woman in outdated clothing, her eyes deep pools of sorrow and hope. "You've come so far, Sarah," she said, her voice echoing as if from a great distance. "But the final step remains. Are you prepared to pay the price for our freedom?" I hesitated, the athame heavy in my hand. What exactly am I sacrificing?" The woman's form flickered like a candle in the wind. "Your connection to this world, your memories, your sense of self. You'll live, but as a stranger to all you've known and loved." Tears streamed down my face as the full weight of the choice before me became clear. To free these souls, to protect my son from their influence, I would have to become a ghost in my own life. "Will my son be safe?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The spectral woman nodded. "The ritual will banish us from this plane. Your son will be free from our influence." I closed my eyes, thinking of my child sleeping peacefully down the hall, unaware of the momentous decision being made. Could I give up everything, even my memories of him, to ensure his safety? "I'll do it," I said, opening my eyes with newfound resolve. "Tell me what I need to do." "You must complete the circle," the woman instructed. "Use the atame to draw blood, then speak the final words of the incantation." With a shaking hand, I pricked my palm with the ritual knife. As blood welled up, I began to recite the final phrases, my voice growing stronger with each word. The room began to spin, the spectral figures swirling faster and faster around me. I felt a tugging sensation, as if my very essence was being pulled from my body. "Thank you, Sarah," the woman's voice said, growing fainter. "Your sacrifice will not be forgotten, even if you forget yourself." A blinding light filled the room, and I felt myself falling into an abyss of lost memories and fading connections. The faces of my loved ones flashed before my eyes, my son, my parents, friends, each one slipping away like sand through my fingers. When I opened my eyes, the room was still. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating a space that felt oddly unfamiliar. I stood, disoriented, trying to piece together who I was, why I was here. A photo on the mantel caught my eye, a woman and a young boy, both smiling. I stared at it, feeling a tug of something I couldn't quite grasp. The woman looked like me, but I felt no connection to her or the child. As I wandered through the house, touching objects that should have held meaning but felt foreign, I caught sight of my reflection in a mirror. The face that looked back was my own, yet somehow not. I touched my cheek, wondering at the tears I found there. A small voice broke the silence. "Mom, are you okay?" I turned to see the boy from the photo standing in the doorway, his eyes wide with concern. I should have felt something, love, recognition, anything. But there was only a vast emptiness where those emotions should have been. I'm fine," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth, just a little confused. The boy's face fell as if he could sense the disconnect between us. Do you remember me?" I knelt down, looking into his eyes and searching desperately for any flicker of recognition. "I'm sorry," I whispered, fresh tears spilling down my cheeks. "I'm so sorry, but I don't." As the boy ran from the room, sobbing, I remained on my knees, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I'd done. I had saved him, saved countless trapped souls, but at what cost? In that moment, surrounded by the remnants of a life I no longer recognized, I understood the true nature of sacrifice. I had given up everything to free those trapped souls, to protect a child I no longer knew. As I stood in the quiet house, a stranger to myself and my own family, I wondered if it had been worth it. But deep down, in a place untouched by the ritual's power, I felt a flicker of peace. Whatever I had lost, whatever I had become, I had made a choice born of love and desperation. And in that choice, perhaps, lay the seeds of my redemption. Months had passed since the ritual that had changed everything. I walked through the streets of New Orleans, a stranger in a city that should have felt like home. The voices that had once plagued me were gone, but in their place was a silence so profound it ached. I found myself drawn to the small voodoo shop where my journey had begun. The bell tinkled softly as I pushed open the door, the scent of incense and herbs enveloping me. "I wondered when you'd return," came a familiar voice. Madame Laveau emerged from behind the beaded curtain, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. You know me?" I asked, hope flaring in my chest. She shook her head slowly. "Not as you were, child, but I know what you did. The spirits speak of your sacrifice." I sank into a chair, overwhelmed by emotions I couldn't fully comprehend. "I don't remember anything. There's a boy who calls me Mom, but when I look at him, I feel nothing. It's like I'm empty inside." Madame Laveau sat across from me, taking my hands in hers. "You're not empty, Sarah. You're full of love so powerful it transcended memory itself. That's why you're here now, seeking answers." "Can you help me remember?" I pleaded. Her expression turned grave. "The magic that took your memories is old and powerful. To undo it would risk unleashing the very souls you freed. But perhaps we can find another way to help you reconnect with your life." Over the next few weeks, I returned to the shop regularly. Madame Laveau guided me through meditation techniques and gave me herbs to strengthen my connection to the spiritual world. Slowly, fragments began to surface. Not memories exactly, but feelings, impressions of the life I'd lost. One day, as I sat in the shop sipping tea infused with herbs meant to open the mind, a little boy burst through the door, his face streaked with tears. "Please," he sobbed, looking at Madame Laveau. "You have to help my mom remember me." I froze, recognizing him as the child from the photographs in my house. "My son." Madame Laveau knelt before him. "What's your name, child?" "Ethan," he sniffled. "I followed my mom here. I just want her back." I felt a tug in my chest, a pain that went beyond the physical. Madame Laveau glanced at me, her eyes questioning. I nodded, and she gently guided Ethan to sit beside me. "Ethan," I said softly, the name feeling both foreign and achingly familiar on my tongue. "I'm so sorry for what you've been going through." He looked up at me, his eyes so full of hope it nearly broke me. "Do you remember me now, Mom?" I shook my head, fighting back tears. Not, not exactly, but I'm trying. Can you tell me about us? About our life together? And so, sitting in that small, incense-filled shop, my son began to weave the tapestry of our shared past. He told me about pancake sundaes and bedtime stories, about the time I dressed up as a superhero for his birthday party, and the way I always kissed his forehead before saying goodnight. As he spoke, something stirred within me. Not memories exactly, but a deep, visceral knowing. This child was mine, flesh of my flesh, heart of my heart, and I had given up everything to keep him safe. The park, Ethan exclaimed suddenly. Mom, remember how we always went to the park on Saturdays? Can we go there now? I looked to Madame Laveau, who nodded encouragingly. Go, she said softly. Sometimes the body remembers what the mind has forgotten. Hand in hand, Ethan and I walked to the nearby park. As we approached the playground, a wave of déjà vu washed over me. I couldn't recall specific events, but the feeling of rightness, of belonging, was overwhelming. Push me on the swings, Mom, Ethan called, already running ahead. As I pushed him higher and higher, his laughter rang out like a bell, and suddenly, like a dam breaking, emotion flooded through me. Love, fierce and protective, joy so intense it brought tears to my eyes. Higher, Mom, Ethan giggled, and in that moment I knew. I might never recover my specific memories, but the essence of who I was, a mother who loved her son more than life itself, that could never truly be erased. Later that evening, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at me with eyes wise beyond his years. It's okay if you don't remember everything, Mom, he said softly. We can make new memories together. I kissed his forehead, a gesture that now felt as natural as breathing. We will, sweetheart, every single day. As I closed his bedroom door, I felt a shift in the air. A whisper, barely audible, brushed past my ear. Thank you, Sarah, it said, and I knew it was the voice of one of the souls I had freed. Your sacrifice was not in vain. Love, true love, can never be fully forgotten. I smiled, feeling for the first time since the ritual a sense of peace. The road ahead would not be easy, but with Ethan by my side, I knew we would find our way back to each other, one new memory at a time. The next morning, I woke to the smell of something burning. Rushing to the kitchen, I found Ethan surrounded by a mess of flour and eggshells, a plate of charred pancakes in front of him. I was trying to make pancakes like we used to, he said, his lower lip trembling. But I couldn't remember the recipe. I laughed, pulling him into a hug. Oh, honey, it's perfect. How about we learn the recipe together? As we mixed a new batch of batter, giggling over our mistakes and creating a mess that would take hours to clean, I realized something profound. The memories I had lost were precious, yes, but the ones we were creating now were just as valuable. Each moment, each shared laugh or tender touch was a thread weaving us back together. The voices in the drains were gone, the trapped souls freed. But in their place was something far more powerful. The sound of my son's laughter, the warmth of his hand in mine, and the knowledge that love, true love, could overcome even the darkest of magics. As we sat down to enjoy our imperfect but love-filled breakfast, I silently thanked whatever forces had led me to make that impossible choice. The path ahead was uncertain, but with Ethan by my side, I was ready to face whatever came next, one new memory at a time. The years passed like a dream, hazy and indistinct. I moved through life as if watching it from a distance, never quite connecting with the world around me. The boy who called me Mom grew into a teenager, then a young man, while I remained trapped in a fog of half-remembered emotions and unfamiliar routines. It was on Ethan's 18th birthday that everything changed. I had prepared a small celebration, following the traditions that felt more like instructions than memories. As I lit the candles on the cake, a sharp pain lanced through my head, bringing me to my knees. Mom! Ethan cried, rushing to my side. What's wrong? I couldn't answer. Images flashed before my eyes. A ritual circle. Spectral figures swirling around me, a blinding light. And then, like a dam breaking, the memories came flooding back. I gasped, looking up at Ethan with new eyes. "Oh, my boy," I whispered, reaching out to touch his face. I remember everything." Confusion and hope warred on Ethan's face. "Mom, what do you mean?" I stood shakily, pulling him into a fierce hug. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I'm sorry for all the years I couldn't be the mother you deserved." As we sat at the kitchen table, the birthday cake forgotten, I told him everything. The voices in the drains, the trapped souls, the ritual that had cost me my memories but saved him from a lifetime of torment. Ethan listened in stunned silence, his cake untouched. When I finished, he shook his head in disbelief. "All this time, you sacrificed everything for me, and I never knew." "I would do it again in a heartbeat," I said, squeezing his hand. "You're my son. There's nothing I wouldn't do to keep you safe." A shadow crossed Ethan's face. "But Mom, what about the souls you freed? Are they really gone?" As if in answer, a cold breeze swept through the kitchen, extinguishing the candles on the cake. A whisper barely audible filled the air. "Sarah, help us." I froze, my heart pounding. "No," I breathed. "It can't be." Ethan's eyes widened. "Mom, what is it?" Before I could answer, the whisper came again, louder this time. "The barrier weakens. We need you, Sarah." I stood, my legs shaking. They're back. Or, they never truly left. Over the next few days, the whispers grew stronger. They came not just from the drains now, but from every corner of the house. Ethan, now aware of the supernatural forces at play, tried to help me make sense of it all. "Maybe the ritual wasn't permanent," he suggested one evening as we pored over old books I'd dug out of the attic. "Or maybe something's changed in the spirit world." I rubbed my temples, fighting off a headache. "Whatever it is, we need to fix it. I can't let those souls suffer again." Ethan looked at me, worry etched on his young face. "But Mom, what if it cost you your memories again? I can't lose you a second time." I pulled him close, kissing the top of his head like I used to when he was small. "We'll find another way. Together." Our search for answers led us back to the voodoo shop where my journey had begun all those years ago. To my surprise, Madame Laveau was still there, looking as if she hadn't aged a day. "I've been expecting you," she said as we entered. "The spirits are restless. The balance has been disturbed." "Can you help us?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "I can't let those souls be trapped again, but I can't lose my son either." Madame Laveau's eyes softened as she looked between Ethan and me. The magic that bound those souls was old and powerful. Breaking it once was a miracle. To do so again... She trailed off, shaking her head. "There has to be a way," Ethan insisted. What if we shared the burden? Mom doesn't have to do it alone this time." I turned to him, aghast. "No, Ethan. I won't let you risk yourself." But Madame Laveau was nodding slowly. "The boy may be onto something. A shared sacrifice, freely given. It could work." As she explained the ritual, my heart grew heavy. It would require both Ethan and me to offer up a part of ourselves. Not our memories this time, but something equally precious. Our connection to each other. "If we do this," I said, my voice shaking, "we'll still remember each other, but the emotional bond will be severed," Madame Laveau finished. "You'll be as strangers to each other, with only the knowledge of your relationship, not the feeling." Ethan grabbed my hand, his eyes fierce. "I don't care. Mom, you gave up everything for me once. Let me do this for you, for us." Tears streamed down my face as I pulled him into a hug. "My brave, wonderful boy. Are you sure?" He nodded against my shoulder. "I'm sure." The ritual was set for the next full moon. As Ethan and I made our preparations, we spent every moment we could together, trying to burn every laugh, every touch, every shared glance into our memories. On the night of the ritual, we stood hand in hand in the center of a circle Madame Laveau had drawn. The air thrummed with energy, and the whispers of the trapped souls grew to a fevered pitch. "Remember," Madame Laveau instructed, "focus on your love for each other. It's that love that will power the ritual and free the souls." As she began to chant, I looked at Ethan one last time as my son. "I love you," I whispered. "No matter what happens, never doubt that." He squeezed my hand, tears in his eyes. "I love you too, Mom. Always." A blinding light engulfed us, and I felt a wrenching sensation, as if something essential was being torn from my very soul. The world spun, and I heard the cries of 1,000 freed spirits rising in jubilation. When the light faded, I found myself still standing in the circle, my hand clasped with a stranger's. I looked at the young man before me, feeling a sense of recognition but none of the overwhelming love I knew I should feel. "Did it work?" he asked, his voice uncertain. I nodded, fighting back tears I didn't fully understand. "I think so. The voices are gone." Madame Laveau approached us, her face etched with sorrow and respect. "It is done. The souls are freed, and the balance is restored." As we left the shop, the young man, Ethan, I reminded myself, turned to me. "So, what now?" I looked at him, this stranger who was my son, and felt a glimmer of something. Not the all-consuming love of before, but a spark, a potential. "Now," I said, managing a small smile, "we start over. We make new memories, build a new relationship." He nodded, a similar spark in his eyes. "I'd like that, Mom." As we walked home under the starlit sky, I realized that while we had lost something precious, we had gained something too. A second chance, an opportunity to choose each other not out of obligation or ingrained feeling, but out of genuine connection. The road ahead would be challenging, full of awkward moments and rediscovered bonds. But as I looked at the young man beside me, I felt a sense of hope. We had faced the impossible twice now and emerged stronger. Whatever came next, we would face it together, forging a new kind of family from the ashes of our sacrifice. Years had passed since the second ritual, and life had settled into a new normal. Ethan and I had rebuilt our relationship from the ground up, forging a bond that was different from before but no less meaningful. We were more like close friends than mother and son, but there was a comfort in that closeness that we both cherished. It was on a crisp autumn evening that our carefully reconstructed world began to unravel. I was preparing dinner when I heard a sound I hadn't heard in years, a whisper from the kitchen drain. "Sarah, we need you." The spoon I was holding clattered to the floor. "No," I whispered. "It can't be." Ethan rushed into the kitchen, alerted by the noise. "Mom, what's wrong?" I turned to him, my face pale. The voices, they're back. His eyes widened in understanding. We had shared the story of our past many times over the years, piecing together the history we could no longer feel. "Are you sure?" As if in answer, the whisper came again, louder this time. "The veil weakens, the balance shifts. Help us, Sarah." Ethan and I exchanged worried glances. "What do we do?" he asked. I shook my head, feeling a familiar dread settling in my stomach. "I don't know, but we need to find out what's happening." Over the next few days, the whispers grew stronger, more insistent. They came not just from the drains now, but from every corner of the house. Shadows seemed to flicker at the edges of our vision, and a constant chill hung in the air. We returned to Madame Laveau's shop, hoping for answers, but where the shop had stood for decades, we found only an empty lot, overgrown with weeds. "This doesn't make sense," Ethan said, kicking at a broken piece of concrete. "Where could she have gone?" I felt a tug of memory, a fragment of knowledge from a life that no longer felt entirely mine. There's someone else we can try. An old friend, I think. We made our way to a small house on the outskirts of the French Quarter. As we approached, the door swung open, revealing a woman with intricate tattoos and eyes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom. Marie, I breathed, the name coming to me from somewhere deep in my subconscious. She nodded, a sad smile on her face. I've been waiting for you, Sarah. And you must be Ethan. Come in, both of you. We have much to discuss. Inside, Marie's house was cluttered with an eclectic mix of mystical items and modern technology. She gestured for us to sit at a table covered in arcane symbols. The balance you struck, she began without preamble. It was always temporary. The spirit world is in constant flux, and now it's shifting again. But we sacrifice so much, Ethan protested. Twice. How can it not be enough? Marie's eyes softened with sympathy. Magic, especially old magic, is never simple. The rituals you performed were powerful, yes, but they were a bandage on a wound that goes deeper than you can imagine. I leaned forward, my heart racing. What does that mean for us? For the trapped souls? It means, Marie said gravely, that the barrier between worlds is weakening. The souls you freed are at risk of being pulled back into their prison, and new souls are in danger of becoming trapped. There has to be something we can do, I insisted. We can't let them suffer again. Marie was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant as if seeing something beyond the room. There is a way, she said finally, but it's dangerous, more so than anything you've faced before. Ethan and I exchanged glances. Despite the years and the ritual that had dulled our emotional connection, I could see the determination in his eyes that mirrored my own. Tell us, we said in unison. Marie began to explain, her voice low and urgent. The ritual she described was complex, requiring not just a sacrifice of memory or emotion, but a willing journey into the spirit world itself. One of you must cross over, she said. Become an anchor, a living bridge between worlds. It's the only way to permanently seal the breach and free the souls for good. The weight of her words settled over us like a heavy blanket. What happens to the one who crosses over? Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marie's eyes were filled with sorrow. They would exist between worlds, neither fully alive nor dead, unable to return to this reality but present enough to maintain the balance. I felt a chill run down my spine. The cost was unimaginable, and yet... I'll do it, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Mom, no, Ethan protested. You've sacrificed enough. Let me do this. I turned to him, seeing not just the young man before me, but flashes of the little boy he had been. Ethan, you have your whole life ahead of you. I've lived mine. It's my turn to protect you. He shook his head vehemently. We're supposed to be in this together. We've always faced things together. As we argued, our voices rising with emotion we hadn't felt in years, Marie watched us with a strange expression. Perhaps, she interjected softly, there is another way. We turned to her, hope and fear warring in our hearts. What do you mean? I asked. The ritual requires a living anchor, Marie explained, but it doesn't specify that it must be a single soul. If you were willing, you could both go. Together. Your shared sacrifice, your combined essence, might be strong enough to seal the breach permanently. Ethan and I looked at each other, a lifetime of shared history passing between us in a single glance. We'd be together? He asked. Marie nodded. In a way. Your souls would be entwined, existing in a state beyond normal life or death. It's not an easy path, but we'd be together, I finished. I reached out, taking Ethan's hand in mine. What do you think, son? He squeezed my hand, a smile breaking through his worried expression. I think we've always been strongest when we're together. As we began to plan for the ritual that would change everything, I felt a surge of emotion I hadn't experienced in years. Love, fierce and protective, for the son who had been my whole world. Pride in the man he had become. And a deep, unshakable certainty that whatever came next, we would face it as we always had, together. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with dangers we could scarcely imagine. But as I looked at Ethan, I knew that we had already overcome the impossible. We had sacrificed, rebuilt, and rediscovered each other. Now, we would take the final step, bridging worlds, not just for the lost souls we sought to save, but for each other. As we left Marie's house, stepping out into a world that suddenly seemed both familiar and utterly foreign, Ethan turned to me. "Are you scared?" he asked softly. I nodded, allowing myself to be vulnerable in a way I hadn't been in years. Terrified, but also ready. "How about you?" He smiled, a mix of fear and determination in his eyes. "Same. But Mom, I'm glad it's you I'm doing this with." I pulled him into a hug, feeling the barriers we had built crumbling away. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." As we walked home to prepare for our final journey, the whispers from the spirit world seemed to fade into the background. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever sacrifices we would have to make, we would face them together. Mother and son, bound by love and choice, ready to become the guardians of two worlds. The night of the final ritual arrived, shrouded in a mist that seemed to blur the lines between our world and the next. Ethan and I stood hand in hand in Marie's backyard, surrounded by an intricate circle of symbols drawn in chalk and salt. Candles flickered at the cardinal points, their flames dancing in an unseen breeze. Marie moved around us, making final preparations. Her voice was low and urgent as she spoke. "Remember, once you cross over, there's no coming back. You'll exist between worlds, guardians of the veil." I squeezed Ethan's hand, feeling a mixture of fear and resolve. "We understand," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Ethan nodded, his face pale but determined. "We're ready." Marie paused, looking at us with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of sorrow and wisdom. "Are you sure? There's still time to turn back." Ethan and I exchanged a glance, years of shared history passing between us in that single moment. Despite the ritual that had dulled our emotional connection, I felt a surge of love and pride for the man my son had become. "We're sure," Ethan said firmly. "We do this together, or not at all." Marie nodded solemnly. "Then let us begin." As she started to chant in a language I didn't recognize, the air around us began to thicken. The mist crept into the circle, swirling around our feet and rising up like spectral fingers. "Mom?" Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm scared." I turned to him, seeing not just the man he was now, but flashes of the little boy he had been. "Me too, sweetheart. But we've faced worse than this. We'll get through it together." The mist continued to rise, obscuring the world beyond our circle. Marie's chanting grew louder, more insistent. I felt a tugging sensation as if something was trying to pull my very essence from my body. Suddenly, spectral figures began to materialize around us. Men, women, children, souls trapped between worlds, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and desperation. "Sarah," they called, their voices a haunting chorus. "Ethan, help us, free us." I felt Ethan's grip on my hand tighten. "We will," he promised. "That's why we're here." The tugging sensation intensified, and I felt my feet leave the ground. Ethan and I floated in the center of the circle, surrounded by swirling mist and pleading spirits. "Now!" Marie's voice cut through the chaos. "Focus on each other, on your bond. Let it anchor you as you cross over." I locked eyes with Ethan, pouring every ounce of love and memory I possessed into that gaze. I saw his childhood, his first steps, his graduation. I saw the man he had become, brave and kind and strong. "I love you, Mom," he said, his voice echoing strangely in the otherworldly space. "I love you too, my brave boy," I replied, feeling tears stream down my face. There was a blinding flash of light and then silence. When I opened my eyes, the world had changed. We stood in a place that was neither here nor there, a liminal space bathed in soft, diffuse light. Ethan was beside me, our hands still clasped. "Did it work?" he asked, his voice sounding both near and impossibly far away. Before I could answer, I felt a shift in the fabric of reality around us. Souls began to pass by, no longer trapped but flowing freely between worlds. I could feel their gratitude, their relief as they moved on to whatever awaited them. "I think it did," I breathed, awestruck by the beauty and power of what we were witnessing. As we watched, I became aware of our new existence. We were neither fully alive nor dead, but something in between. Guardians of the Veil, Marie had called us. I could feel the weight of that responsibility settling over us like a mantle. "So what now?" Ethan asked, looking around at our new reality. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. "Now, we do what we came here to do. We watch over the souls, keep the balance." Ethan nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Together. Always together," I agreed. As we began to explore our new realm, I marveled at the turn our lives had taken, from a single mother battling supernatural forces to guardians of the spirit world. It was a journey I could never have imagined. But looking at Ethan, seeing the strength and compassion in his eyes, I knew we were exactly where we were meant to be. We had sacrificed much, but we had gained something precious, an eternity together, protecting both the world we had left behind and the souls passing through our care. In this in-between place with my son by my side, I felt a profound sense of purpose. The voices that had once tormented us were quiet now, replaced by the gentle flow of souls finding their way. "Hey, Mom," Ethan said after what could have been minutes or centuries. "Yes, sweetheart." He grinned, a flash of his old mischievous self shining through. "Think we can still get pizza delivered here?" I laughed, the sound echoing through our ethereal realm. "Somehow, I doubt it. But I'm sure we can find some spiritual equivalent." As we settled into our new roles, guiding lost souls and maintaining the delicate balance between worlds, I realized that our greatest adventure was just beginning. We had faced unimaginable challenges, made impossible choices, and emerged stronger for it. Now, in this timeless space between worlds, Ethan and I had found not just purpose, but a deeper connection than we'd ever known. We were more than mother and son now. We were partners, guardians, two halves of a whole dedicated to protecting the flow of souls. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges we could scarcely imagine. But as I looked at Ethan, I felt nothing but gratitude and love. Whatever came next, we would face it as we always had, together, bound by a love that transcended memory, emotion, and now even the boundaries of life and death itself. In this strange, beautiful realm, with my son by my side, I was finally, truly home. Time in the spirit realm flowed differently, a river of moments that could stretch into eternity or compress into the blink of an eye. Ethan and I had settled into our roles as guardians of the veil, guiding souls and maintaining the delicate balance between worlds. We had found a rhythm, a purpose that filled us with a deep sense of satisfaction. But as we stood at the threshold between realms one day, or was it a century, we felt a disturbance ripple through the ethereal plane. The steady stream of souls passing through our care suddenly faltered, like a river meeting an unseen dam. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice tinged with concern, "do you feel that?" I nodded, a frown creasing my brow. "Something's wrong. The flow. It's changing." We moved closer to the disturbance, our ethereal forms gliding through the misty in-between. As we approached, we saw a cluster of souls, trapped and swirling in confusion. "What's happening?" one soul cried out, its voice a mix of fear and desperation. "We can't move on," another wailed, The way is blocked. Ethan and I exchanged worried glances. This was unlike anything we had encountered in our time as guardians. We need to investigate, I said, my protective instincts kicking in. These souls are counting on us. Ethan nodded, determination shining in his eyes. Let's do it. Together. We pressed forward, pushing against an invisible barrier that seemed to be forming at the edge of our realm. As we struggled, flashes of the mortal world began to bleed through. Fleeting images of a city in chaos, people running in terror, strange energies crackling through the air. "Mom," Ethan gasped, "I think something's happening in the living world, something big enough to affect the spirit realm." I felt a chill run through me. We have to find out what it is. If the balance is disturbed in both realms, the consequences could be catastrophic, Ethan finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. We redoubled our efforts, pushing against the barrier with all our strength. Suddenly, with a sound like shattering glass, we broke through. The scene that greeted us was one of utter chaos. We stood on a ghostly version of a New Orleans street, watching as panicked spirits ran in all directions. In the distance, a swirling vortex of dark energy pulsed ominously. An elderly spirit noticed us and rushed over. "Thank the heavens the guardians are here, you have to help us." "What's happening?" I asked, trying to make sense of the madness around us. The spirit's form flickered with agitation. "It's the necromancer. He's trying to tear down the veil between worlds, to control both the living and the dead." Ethan and I exchanged alarmed looks. This was far beyond anything we had prepared for. "Where is this necromancer?" Ethan demanded. The spirit pointed a trembling hand toward the vortex. "There, at the heart of the storm. But be careful. He's more powerful than any mortal has a right to be." I squared my shoulders, feeling a resolve I hadn't experienced since our days in the living world. "We have to stop him. The balance of both realms depends on it." Ethan nodded, a fierce light in his eyes. "I'm with you, Mom. All the way." As we made our way toward the vortex, we came across more lost and frightened souls. We did our best to calm and guide them, but the pull of the necromancer's power was strong. "How are we going to stop this?" Ethan asked as we drew closer to the heart of the disturbance. "We're spirits now, not physical beings. Can we even affect the mortal world?" I pondered this, drawing on the wisdom we'd accumulated in our time as guardians. We may not be able to act directly, but we have influence. We can rally the spirits, maybe even reach out to sensitive mortals for help. As if in response to my words, a young woman came into view. A living woman, though her spirit seemed to shine brighter than most. She was standing at the edge of the chaos, her hands raised as if trying to hold back the tide of dark energy. "There," I pointed. "She must be a medium or a sensitive. We can work through her." We approached the woman, who seemed to sense our presence. Her eyes widened as she took us in. Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling but determined. "We're the guardians of the veil," Ethan explained quickly. "We're here to help, but we need your assistance to interact with the physical world." The woman nodded, a spark of hope igniting in her eyes. "I'm Maya. I've been trying to hold back this darkness, but I'm not strong enough on my own." "You're not alone anymore, Maya," I assured her. "Together, we can stop this necromancer and restore the balance." As we began to formulate a plan, combining Maya's physical presence with our spiritual knowledge and power, I felt a surge of the old determination that had carried us through so many trials in life. This new challenge was daunting, a threat to the very fabric of existence. But as I looked at Ethan, his spirit shining with courage and compassion, I knew we would face it as we had faced everything else, together, with love as our strongest weapon. The necromancer's vortex loomed before us, a maelstrom of dark magic and tormented souls. But we stood united, two guardians of the spirit realm and a brave mortal medium, ready to fight for the balance of both worlds. As we prepared to confront the darkness, I realized that our journey was far from over. In fact, It seemed our greatest battle was just beginning. But with Ethan by my side, and the strength of our bond flowing between us, I felt ready for whatever lay ahead. "Are you ready?" I asked, looking at Ethan and Maya. They both nodded, determination etched on their faces. "Then let's save both worlds," I said, my voice ringing with purpose. And together, we stepped forward to face the storm. The battle against the necromancer raged on, a clash of spiritual energies that shook both the mortal and spirit realms. Ethan and I, with the help of Maya, the brave medium, had managed to rally a force of spirits and sensitive mortals to our cause. But the necromancer's power was immense, fueled by dark magics and the torment of trapped souls. As we fought, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought us here. From a single mother battling supernatural forces to guardians of the veil between worlds, and now to defenders of both realms, our path had been anything but ordinary. "Mom," Ethan's voice cut through my thoughts. "Look out!" I dodged just in time as a bolt of dark energy crackled past me. The necromancer, a figure wreathed in shadows and crackling with malevolent power, laughed coldly. "You cannot hope to defeat me," he sneered. "I have mastered the secrets of life and death themselves." Maya, her face pale but determined, stepped forward. "You've perverted those secrets," she shot back. "Life and death are meant to be in balance, not controlled by one man's ambition." I placed a comforting hand on Maya's shoulder, feeling the warmth of her life force even through my spectral form. "She's right," I added. "What you're doing goes against the very nature of existence." The necromancer's eyes flashed with anger. "Nature, balance, these are concepts for the weak. With my power, I will reshape both worlds in my image." Ethan moved to stand beside us, his spirit glowing with resolve. "We won't let that happen," he declared. As we faced off against the necromancer, I felt a surge of pride for my son. Even in the face of such overwhelming darkness, his courage never wavered. The battle intensified, with spirits and sensitive mortals clashing against the necromancer's dark forces. The veil between worlds grew thin, reality itself seeming to warp and twist around us. In a moment of relative calm, Ethan turned to me, his eyes filled with a mix of determination and fear. "Mom, I don't know if we can win this. He's so powerful." I looked at my son, seeing not just the spiritual being he had become, but flashes of the little boy he once was. "We have to try, sweetheart. Too much depends on us." Maya, overhearing our exchange, joined us. "There might be a way," she said hesitantly, "but it's dangerous, and it would require an enormous sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" I asked, though a part of me already knew the answer. Maya's eyes were sorrowful as she explained. "To truly defeat him and restore the balance, we need to seal the rift he's created. But to do that, someone would have to stay behind, to become a permanent anchor between the worlds." The weight of her words settled over us like a heavy shroud. Ethan and I exchanged a long look, years of shared history passing between us in that silent moment. "I'll do it," we both said simultaneously. Maya shook her head. "It can't be both of you. The anchor needs to be a single soul, strong enough to withstand the pull of both realms." I took a deep breath, decision crystallizing in my mind. "Then it has to be me. Ethan, you have so much left to experience, so much good you can do as a guardian." "No, Mom," Ethan protested, his voice breaking. "I can't lose you, not again." I cupped his face in my hands, marveling at how he could still feel so solid to me in this spiritual form. "You won't lose me, sweetheart. I'll always be a part of you, and now I'll be a part of everything, watching over both worlds, keeping them in balance." Tears shimmered in Ethan's eyes. "But what about our eternity together? Everything we've been through?" I smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace despite the chaos around us. "Our love transcends time and space, Ethan. This isn't an ending, it's a new beginning." As we held each other, the necromancer's voice boomed across the battlefield. Enough of this sentimentality. Face your doom. Maya looked at us urgently. We have to act now while he's focused on attacking. Are you sure about this? I nodded, steeling myself for what was to come. I'm sure. Ethan, Maya, are you ready? They both nodded, determination shining through their tears. With a final embrace, I stepped forward, channeling all the love, all the sacrifice, all the strength I had cultivated throughout my incredible journey. As Maya began to chant and Ethan lent his spiritual energy to her spell, I felt myself begin to change, to expand. The necromancer, realizing too late what we were attempting, let out a howl of rage. No! You cannot defeat me! But his protests were in vain. I could feel myself spreading out, becoming one with the fabric of both realms. The rift began to close, the balance slowly restoring. As my consciousness expanded, I saw flashes of both worlds, the spirit realm and the mortal plane. I saw the souls we had guided, the lives we had touched, and at the center of it all, I saw Ethan, my brave, wonderful son. I love you, I whispered, my voice echoing through both realities. Always and forever. Ethan's voice reached me, filled with love and acceptance. I love you too, Mom. Thank you. For everything. As the rift sealed completely, I felt a sense of completion, of rightness. The necromancer's power crumbled, his dark ambitions thwarted by the power of love and sacrifice. In that moment, as I became one with the balance between worlds, I understood that this was not an end, but a new beginning. I would watch over both realms, a silent guardian ensuring the natural order of life and death, and Ethan, my beloved son, would continue our work, guiding souls and protecting the veil. We would be separated, yet eternally connected, a family bound by love that transcended all boundaries. As my consciousness settled into its new, expanded state, I felt a profound sense of peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead for both realms, I would be there, a constant presence maintaining the delicate balance of existence. And in that eternal moment, spanning two worlds and countless souls, I knew that our incredible journey had led us exactly where we were meant to be.